Thank you for downloading the book in the free electronic library royalib.ru, http://royalib.ru. All books by the author, http://royalib.ru/author/Osovin_Igor.html. The same book in other formats, http://royalib.ru/book/Osovin_Igor/Putin_Prot4_Medvedev_koviram.html. Enjoy reading. Igor Osovin, Sergei Pachichev. Putin vs. Medvedev, Bulldog Fight Under the Carpet. Address to readers. We are glad to welcome you, dear colleagues. By this capacious word, colleagues, we mean everyone who is not indifferent to conspiracy theories as a method of knowing the reality, hidden under the thickness of lies and delusions. At all times, sane people did not believe the official point of view of state and religious institutions of power, rightly believing that the truth lies in something other than what everyone is trying to convince. Time, in the end, always put everything in its place. And, as a rule, it was precisely those who doubted the generally accepted point of view that turned out to be right. The famous Russian scientist and public and political figure A.G. Dugin, in his fundamental work, Conspirology, quite rightly pointed out, during the last centuries of modern history, conspiracy motives in historiography, cultural studies and even everyday politics play such a significant role, and in some cases are such a weighty argument, that this in itself makes us to carefully study the phenomenon of conspiracy theories. In the newest Dictionary of Foreign Words and Expressions, published in 2001, this word, English conspirology, is interpreted as a science that investigates underground activities, conspiracies and secret societies. Just like science. Although there is still an opinion in wide scientific circles that conspiracy theory, due to the frivolity of its methodology, cannot claim the role of an independent science and, at best, can be of applied importance within the framework of a religious or political science discipline. But at the same time, many opponents agree that conspiracy theories, reflecting the realities of the modern world, have a clearly defined historical aspect that affects many humanitarian areas of scientific knowledge. What is conspiracy theory, and is it possible to formulate a more complete definition of this phenomenon? It is not possible to fully answer this question today, since many aspects of this phenomenon are still poorly understood. And, last but not least, because the negative attitude towards conspiracy theory on the part of academic science and official authorities is the main barrier to the full study of this social phenomenon, demonstrating its amazing vitality from biblical times to the present day. Alexander Dugin characterizes this phenomenon of social life in the following way. If in the 60s to 80s of the last century, conspiracy theories were the lot of marginal eccentrics and the yellowest tabloids, in the 90s it became a phenomenon of mass culture. The breakthrough began with the X-Files series, where intelligence agents Mulder and Scully investigated all sorts of possible conspiracies and incursions, illustrating an endless array of conspiracy fantasies. The truth is out there, says the motto of X-Files, the truth is not here, the truth is hidden. This is the first gesture of a conspiratorial attitude towards the world. It means, we are being deceived, and, therefore, we must get to the bottom of the truth, whatever it may be. Obviously, the truth that needs to be dug up must be some kind of stunning, otherwise it would not be interesting and there would be no reason to hide it, conspiracy theorists argue. Conspiracy theory is gradually becoming a legitimate style, a kind of fashion. And there is reason to believe that this is not just a short-term hobby, but a sustainable social trend. The last 10 years have only confirmed the correctness of Alexander Dugin's conclusions. Even if we do not take into account such a phenomenon of mass culture as Dan Brownism, we have to state that now almost every second blockbuster, be it a book or a movie, is somehow mixed up with conspiracy theories. From the point of view of cultural studies, Alexander Dugin explains this phenomenon by the fact that conspiracy theory is a typical manifestation of postmodern culture, when a critical attitude towards the surrounding reality entails the imposition of various historical contexts and is expressed by a total distrust of the rational principle in politics and art. The positivist attitude to history is ridiculed, while belief in a conspiracy, occult forces and powerful secret organizations, in an invisible hand, and a world behind the scenes that invisibly controls the course of history, is perceived almost as a religious dogma, although it is against academic dogmatism, both in science and in religion. Conspiracy theorists, in the first place, act. This is the main cultural paradox of conspiracy theories. But if conspiracy theory as a phenomenon of mass culture practically does not raise doubts about its existence, then what is the social basis of this phenomenon, speaking in the language of statistics? There is an answer to this question as well. As a clear illustration, let us cite the data obtained by VTSOM during a sociological survey on the territory of Russia in December 2008, when the economic crisis broke out and there was an increase in protest moods in the country. So, on average, 38% of Russians did not trust media reports about the economic crisis. Moreover, the least trust in the media, 45% of respondents. People with higher and incomplete higher education differed, as well as people with secondary specialized education, 39%. Therefore, it is not surprising that the greatest degree of distrust of official media information was observed in cities with a population of over 500,000 people. It was this category of citizens that became the target audience of the first Russian conspiracy internet portal konspirology.org, which was launched in May 2009. Over the past time, dozens of studies have been published on the pages of the internet resource we created, affecting from the position of conspiracy the most pressing topics of the country's socio-political life. Many of these internet publications have caused significant resonance and brought their changes to the political agenda. And now the Yauza Publishing House, together with konspirology.org, is launching a new series of books that will not only continue the research traditions we have established, but, we hope, will make a significant contribution to the development of domestic conspiracy theories. Most of all, the conspiracy approach is typical for the analysis of political processes. Here conspiracy theory receives a very wide and grateful mass support. The authorities, even in the most democratic and transparent societies, always prefer confidentiality. Most political decisions are made behind closed doors, and the media can never truly penetrate this curtain. The quite real and pragmatically explicable zone of the shadow grows in active observers to an incredible size. This is how myths about all kinds of conspiracies are born, systems of occult roots and secret connections are formed, rumors about sinister secret societies and agents of influence appear, Dugin writes, and it's hard to disagree with him. Our participation in this joint project is especially piquant by the fact that earlier, even before engaging in conspiracy theories, the authors of these lines, being professional journalists with 20 years of experience, have repeatedly taken part in various political campaigns as PR technologists, which now gives many ill-wishers a reason to interpret our conspiracy studies as a new format for the manifestation of black PR aimed against those in power. So, at the forum of the internet portal, Public Opinion, during the unfolding stormy debate about the appearance of the konspirology.org resource on the web, the most heated discussion was caused by the question posed by Alexander Krutov, a venerable journalist, laureate of the prize. Artyom Borovic, what is the difference between PR people and journalists, and what should be the profession of a journalist? Such a seemingly simple question, however, in the professional environment revealed a very wide range of opinions, some of them even turned out to be polar. But in this regard, we are more surprised by something else, in the very formulation of the question, as well as in the course of the unfolding controversy, in which the most active part was taken, including conspiracy theorists. A model was laid that completely excludes the right to exist conspiracy journalism as such, and hence the conspiracy theory itself. This, however, quite fits into the generally accepted scheme of both the traditional media community and the expert community, where professional conspiracy theorists, due to the dominance of marginals from conspiracy theories, no place in the sun. On this score, Alexander Dugin, and we are in full solidarity with him, has his own special opinion. In applied political science and political journalism, the conspiracy method has become the most widespread. Most often, the observer and commentator on the actions of the authorities do not know all the background of what is happening and completes unknown links or facts voluntaristically. Conspiracy theory, is an invaluable assistant in this. If there is no obvious and transparent connection between one political figure or event and another, but they must, according to the logic of an article or commentary, be connected with each other, a conspiracy method suggests itself. There is a connection, but it is hidden. This is a secret connection, and if the main characters themselves publicly deny this connection, then by doing so they only confirm the conjecture about its existence. As for the voluntarism manifested in this case, such an assessment does not and cannot discredit professional conspiracy theorists by definition, because voluntarism in this case acts as a manifestation of the subjective principle, without which any creative process is simply impossible. And conspiracy theories are always creativity. And conspiracy theorists, along with journalists or PR people, have every right to it. Does all of the above mean that conspiracy journalism as a genre cannot exist outside the field of professional conspiracy theories, which means that you still have to make a choice between journalism and conspiracy theories, like, for example, between journalism and PR? This issue requires separate consideration. Alexander Dugin points out, there is an iron rule in conspiracy logic: the absence of evidence is the best evidence, because the truth is out there. So, the conspiracy method, and any science is based on the method, still exists. Therefore, conspiracy theory itself should be perceived as a scientific discipline, albeit an applied one, in this case, in relation to political science, the basic foundations of which should be owned by any self-respecting political journalist, and not just a professional conspiracy theorist. But if the classical conspiracy theorist described by Dugin makes no exceptions to the iron rule that the author has deduced, then the conspiracy journalist should never base his version only on the absence of any evidence, because the very formulation of the question in this form may cause the reader complete bewilderment. In other words, at the heart of any conspiracy version of events or phenomena analyzed by a conspiracy journalist, there must be a logic of proof, and not a denial of the opposite. This is the fundamental difference between representatives of the so-called mass conspiracy theory, people who consider themselves conspiracy theorists, from conspiracy journalists, whom everyone around them, including colleagues in the journalistic business, consider themselves conspiracy theorists. This is the whole difference between pop culture, of which conspiracy theory is an integral part, and professional conspiracy journalism, the information platform of which in Runet has become our internet portal conspirology.org. By the way, according to Rambler, by the end of January 2009, at least 3,000 online media were functioning in Runet, among which, before our appearance, there was not a single online publication positioning itself as a conspiracy portal. Even Dugin's internet publications do not openly position themselves in this capacity, although the conspiracy theme is invariably present on their pages. Now, with the release of the first book in this series, conspiracy journalism has confidently stepped out of virtual reality onto the shelves of the country's bookstores, and we are confident that, despite the flurry of quite predictable and expected criticism, the Yauza publishing house will be able to reverse the pernicious mood of political hypocrisy reigning in society. This practice of double standards, when conspiracy is ridiculed, but its methods are used in practice by almost all journalists writing on political topics, was pointed out in his book by Alexander Dugin. In any case, among political commentators, moderately conspiracy methods are more than common. The brief format of a column or TV commentary is not at all suitable for sophisticated political science or a systematic presentation of a set of complex factors that led to a particular political decision. Sometimes it is necessary, even technologically, to compress an explanation to the limit. The format of a conspiracy or secret agreements is ideal in this case too. On the one hand, the meaning is clear to the public, and the lack or complete absence of details, evidence and arguments is explained by the fact that everything that happened was unfolding behind the scenes. This is especially convincing if representatives of special services, law enforcement ministries and departments, etc., are involved in the case. Here, fog and secret become something self-evident. Remember the glib political comments of Sergei Dorenko, Yevgeny Kiselyov or Mikhail Leontiev, and you will understand exactly what they are talking about. And finally, the last quote from Dugin, which finally puts everything in its place and confirms our point of view on the existence of the conspiracy method as such, or occult lodges. But the original methodology of the conspiracy structure is generally the same in all cases. Be that as it may, conspiracy theories are so widespread in modern society, both as a mass culture, and as a mood of minds, and as a structure of political analysis, and even as a research method, that it requires careful consideration and attitude to yourself. In conclusion, I would like to say a few words about our cherished dream. We hope that the implementation of the joint project of the Yauza Publishing House and Conspirology.org will be the first step towards the creation of a non-profit organization that unites all Russian conspiracy theorists, the Russian Conspiracy Society, RCS, whose communication platform will be the new book series. We expect that the new public organization will become a significant part of the Russian expert community and will significantly influence the political climate in the country. We will be glad to cooperate with all persons interested in the implementation of this idea: journalists, political and economic analysts, intelligence veterans, historians, sociologists, religious scholars and esotericists, as well as with other specialists who express a desire to replenish the treasury of conspiracy knowledge within this book series. We will gladly consider all your suggestions for publishing new books and will listen with great attention to any constructive criticism directed at us. We hope that you will be guided by exclusively objective criteria in assessing the modest results of our work. Fascinating reading to you, colleagues, and new conspiracy discoveries. Igor Osovin, Sergei Pachichev. Forward. In March 2012, the 6th presidential election in Russia is to be held. It would not be a big exaggeration to say that not only the name of the person who will govern the country over the next 6 years, but also the strategic vector of the development of the Russian state depends on the outcome of these elections. Will the course towards the modernization of the economy continue, or will the initiated reforms be curtailed again without explanation? Will we finally have a truly civilized market, or, as before, will the state bureaucracy stifle any sprouts of free competition and innovation in the bud? Will it be possible in Russia to create a real, rather than declarative, system of democratic values that will become the basis of the state system, or will the constitution continue to be perceived as a kind of formality that does not oblige anyone to anything? These and other vital questions for the country must be answered after March 11, 2012. But, I think, we will know some of the answers after December 4, 2011, when the first results of the elections of deputies to the State Duma of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation of the 6th Convocation will be summed up. Unless, of course, by this time the current electoral legislation of the Russian Federation has changed dramatically, a state of emergency or martial law has not been introduced on the territory of the country, and the President of the Russian Federation does not dissolve the State Duma before its term of office, because in any of these cases, elections may not take place. But if there are no force majeure circumstances, the newly elected deputies will receive their mandates not for 4 years, as it was before, but for 5 years. It is no secret to anyone that the main intrigue of the new political season will depend on how many votes United Russia will gain in these elections, which is hastily trying to hide behind the banner of the All-Russian Popular Front, namely, whether Vladimir Putin will put forward his candidacy for the post of President of Russia. After all, it is quite obvious that the decision on his nomination will be made only by Vladimir Putin himself, who, having received a real picture of electoral preferences, will weigh all the risks and calculate all the possible consequences of his participation in the 2012 presidential campaign. But it is not at all obvious that the second tandemocrat, Dmitry Medvedev, will delay making a decision on his nomination for the presidency until Vladimir Vladimirovich decides on this issue. And this, too, is no less intrigue of the beginning political season. Now a huge number of opinions and judgments, as well as forecasts of various political analysts and experts about the upcoming Duma elections and the 2012 presidential campaign, are thrown into the public information circulation. And if we do not take into account the substantive value of all these conclusions and predictions, we can safely divide them into 2 almost equal parts. On the one hand, there will be the conclusions of those who believe that Putin and Medvedev, despite the differences that arise between them, are all they play their own game together, and on the other hand, the conclusions of those who proceed from the conviction that there is a real, and not ostentatious, political confrontation between Putin and Medvedev. At the same time, for both those and others, such an insignificant trifle as the fact of preliminary agreements reached in 2008 or earlier fades into the background. Because both of them understand very well, in Russia, where the political style of Byzantium rules the show, such guarantees cost exactly as much as the guarantor himself estimates them. The highest political expediency is the guiding star that has always illuminated the path of any politician, and not only in Russia. The behind-the-scenes politics of the new Russia is generally a fertile topic for conspiracy theorists. Especially now, when the opacity of the political decisions being made and the low level of public confidence in official sources of information form in the public mind some other, parallel, world of high politics, which, behind the battlements of the Kremlin or behind the oak doors of the White House offices, lives its own separate, unknown life. Mere mortals. This sacred secret of power is the product of the power itself, which does not trust its people, fenced off from its people, despising its people. As an example, we will give just one short excerpt from the text published by us at the end of March 2011 on the website conspirology.org. Knowing perfectly well the political scenario being played out by Vladimir Putin's team, Dmitry Medvedev's inner circle is making every effort to prevent its implementation. It was for this purpose, as analysts believe, that a high-profile scandal was initiated, which resulted in the pages of the influential business newspaper Vedomosti. We are talking about the fact that Volodin, being the head of the apparatus of the government of the Russian Federation, is responsible for the Prime Minister's work schedule. It is he who plans and approves the time and place for certain events with Putin's participation. The same functions, but only in relation to Medvedev, are performed in the presidential administration by the first deputy head of the presidential administration of the Russian Federation Vladislav Surkov, with whom Volodin has friendly relations. So, both Volodin and Surkov practically parallel in time all the key meetings with the participation of the first persons of the state, forcing the highest-ranking officials to make a difficult choice for them, in the given political situation, to whom to go, to Medvedev or Putin. However, the press secretaries of both, Natalia Timokova and Dmitry Peskov, respectively, officially refute this information, which only enhances the cumulative effect of such a stuffing. Analysts have yet to figure out the situation. Is it a coordinated game of the ruling tandem, performed in Byzantine style by Volodin and Surkov, or is it real evidence of a behind-the-scenes, and now open, confrontation between two contenders for supreme power in Russia? And there are plenty of such examples in our book. Of course, while working on this book, we did not set ourselves the task of covering the entire layer of problems that lie in the plane of the intersecting interests of both tandemocrats. Yes, this is unrealistic, first of all, in terms of the time that we allotted ourselves to write this book. You will not find in it an in-depth analysis of the opposing political concepts reflected in the sensational reports of the Institute of Contemporary Development, INSER, the Center for Strategic Research, CSR, and a number of other intellectual groups of hidden political influence, the topic of rebooting democracy, and alternative options for the development of the country were widely covered in the media and analyzed in detail by political experts. Conspiracy theorists do not play on a foreign field. And if they do, then, as time shows, they often lose. Therefore, why? On the other hand, you will find in this book a large amount of information that, due to its provocativeness or, as some are sure, politically incorrectness, will never become the object of close scrutiny by the expert community engaged by the authorities, which arrogantly considers such conspiracy theories unworthy of their attention. But it is in these fabrics, in our opinion, that the Koshchev needle of those in power is hidden, who feel completely safe only as long as the conclusions of conspiracy theorists are treated like fairy tales. Believe in these fairy tales or not, you decide. But just remember, one has only to plunge into this fabulous world once and for all in order to get rid of the veil of lies in which the world of everyday life around us is shrouded. As one of the heroes of the film trilogy, The Matrix, said in this case, there will be no turning back. Chapter 1. Origins. Over the past decade, many books have been published in Russia, the authors of which have attempted to explore the political phenomenon of the Petersburg. As an example, it is enough to cite the earliest works on this topic, St. Petersburg against Moscow, or who surrounded by VV Putin, by Boris Mazo, 2003, and Leningraders in the Struggle for Power, by Viktor Stepakov, 2004. However, despite the abundance of historical and purely biographical material, these and other authors were never able to answer the main question that worried the political circles of Russia at the beginning of the 2000s. Why exactly did people from St. Petersburg get the opportunity to actually monopolize power in the country? Various attempts to answer this question, relying solely on external political factors, such as, for example, the special role of Sobchak or the influence of the Chubai team, have not led to anything. And the special role of Anatoly Sobchak in the so-called breaking of the totalitarian system of the USSR, and the huge influence on the political processes of the so-called democratic Russia of the main privatizer of the country Anatoly Chubai, all these are rather consequences than causes. The arrival of Vladimir Putin to the Kremlin with his team became the same consequence of much more hidden circumstances of secret politics. But what is the main reason? What is a causa causarum, the cause of all causes, as the ancient Romans said? In order to answer this most fundamental question of the recent political history of Russia, it is necessary to reject the media stereotypes that have developed in the mass consciousness of a number of public figures and look at their role in the political processes of the recent past from a completely unexpected angle. If you are ready to perceive the picture that the dark side of the moon will bring, and you are not afraid of the collapse of established political illusions, then go ahead. Sobchak. Anatoly Sobchak in the memory of older and middle-aged people is associated primarily with the image of a fiery speaker, a staunch Democrat who hated the totalitarian system and everything that was connected with it. Who was Sobchak really? How sincere were all his escapades against the communist regime and party functionaries of the Soviet era? In the book of memoirs of Yuri Shutov, one of the first assistants of the then chairman of the Leningrad City Council A.A. Sobchak, who is now serving a life sentence in the White Swan prison on a fabricated case, there are amazing lines that show us the convinced Democrat from a completely different, unexpected side. When they had a private conversation on the topic of Stalinist repressions, Sobchak, talking about the victims of Stalinism and the responsibility of the Bolshevik Party for them, uttered the following words. Now, many, pointing to the mistakes of the party, basically nod at the burial grounds of the 30s and call for the defeat of the NKVD-KGB apparatus, which then carried out these repressions, although it is so clear, the purpose of the party was not to destroy people. It became, rather, an indirect product of the achievement of the goal itself. In order to force the system itself to be permanently and quickly improved, it was necessary to publicly destroy the subjects that harmed this process. Doesn't this remind you of anything? One gets the feeling that Sobchak's student, Vladimir Putin, having come to power, was guided precisely by this directive of his teacher. As president, he forced the system itself to be improved, for which he publicly destroyed all the subjects harming this process, Khodorkovsky, Namzlin, Lebedev and other objectionable persons who do not want to integrate into the vertical of power. And here is what, according to Shutov's memoirs, Sobchak said about the punitive machine of Stalin's purges. Undoubtedly, it is a pity for the innocent victims, but it is absurd to blame the NKVD-KGB for the wrong direction, since this organization is, in fact, an ordinary state structure, and the absurdity of the attacks on it is obvious. It's like hitting the hood of a car with a stick because it, driven by a driver, slipped into a ditch. U.T. Shutov. The Godfather of the Petersburg. Moscow, 2011. If Deputy Sobchak had said these words not in the car, having a heart-to-heart talk with his assistant, but from the rostrum of the Congress of People's Deputies of the USSR, all those who hated Gorbachev with his perestroika and dreamed of the return of Stalin's times. But then Sobchak would certainly not have become either the chairman of the Len Soviet, democratic in composition, or later, the first popularly elected mayor of St. Petersburg. Agree that in this argument in defense of the KGB there is something more than the academic prudence of the former professor of Soviet law at Leningrad State University, who Sobchak was before his career rise. A sort of philosophy of a person who emerged from the bowels of the system and justifies this system. Why would, however, even after becoming a public political figure, having received the mandate of a deputy of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, and then the chair of the Democratic Leningrad City Council, Anatoly Sobchak publicly demonstrated far from democratic convictions, which literally caused shock among those around him. Now, behind the prescription of years, few people remember these totalitarian antics of Sobchak, but in the memoirs of eyewitnesses of those events, you can find a lot of interesting things. Here is what, for example, Yuri Shutov writes in his book. Once the newspaper Smina sharply scolded Sobchak, mocking his next oratorical pas towards deputies who were no longer surprised at anything, when the patron, speaking with the mind of a man who had eaten a hefty dose of strychnine, sympathetically took pity on them from the podium for the staleness of the people's deputies' brains. After reading this, Sobchak raged fairly and in a temper demanded for some reason that I take appropriate measures to eliminate this, as he put it, newspaper with an unweathered Komsomol smell, rebuking me of connivance and laxity. Even Yeltsin did not allow himself this in relation to the press, knowing full well what role the media play in the democratization of the country. It was all the more strange to hear this from Sobchak, who has always positioned himself as a banner of publicity. By the way, about the banner, more precisely, about the flag, the tricolor, which already then became a symbol of democratic change. This is how Sobchak's reaction to this symbol is described in his book by Yuri Shutov. When the well-known Leningrad anti-Soviet Alexander Bogdanov, during the regular session of the Len Soviet, hung a tricolor flag from the balcony of the meeting room, which later became the state flag of Russia, Anatoly Sobchak, who chaired, instantly came to his senses, grabbed his hands into the microphone and demanded from Bogdanov to get out along with the flag back home. Many deputies, who, apparently, knew about the preparations for this demonstration performance, began to shout loudly that neither the flag nor the standard-bearer interfered with their work. Then Sobchak made an emotionally beautiful speech about the ban on hanging symbols in the Leningrad City Council hall that were not established by official regulations, otherwise, they say, you can quickly sink to the fascist flag. At the same time, the cartridge transparently hinted, the last time in our history a banner of a similar color, which Bogdanov held in his hands. What is most interesting, this incident, which developed into a scuffle with the police, was broadcast live on Leningrad television. Thousands and thousands of TV viewers witnessed Sobchak's fit of rage at the symbol of democracy. So who was the professor and deputy Sobchak really? A repainted Orthodox partocrat? Or a mishandled Cossack in the camp of Democrats? And here we come to the most, perhaps, curious moment in the political biography of the Democrat Anatoly Sobchak, with whose name our memory links the collapse of the communist regime and the first years of Yeltsin's Russia. When, in 1965, a young lawyer Anatoly Sobchak, who returned from Stavropol, completed his postgraduate studies at the Leningrad State University and defended his Ph.D. According to the rules established in Soviet times, the teaching staff of law institutes and police schools was not only under the close attention of a special department of these educational institutions, but was also bound by certain obligations with the local state security department. Often the heads of the personnel departments of such alma maters were officers of the active reserve of the KGB of the USSR and, looking closely at students or cadets, as well as their teachers, prepared new replenishment for their department. Of course, most of the lawyers recruited from their student days never became career Chekists, but for many years, being investigators, prosecutors, judges or lawyers, they continued to cooperate with the KGB as secret informers. On a special account were teachers of law schools, nurturing personnel for the system of Soviet justice and law and order. Among them was Associate Professor Anatoly Sobchak. In 1973, he transferred to the law faculty of the Leningrad State University, but only in 1982 he defended his doctoral dissertation and became a professor at the age of 45. 3 years later, in 1985, when Mikhail Gorbachev, who became the General Secretary of the Central Committee of the CPSU, announced a course for renewal and acceleration, Anatoly Sobchak received the post of head of the Department of Economic Law. This is the very field of law, which in just a few years, with the first sprouts of entrepreneurship, will be the most in demand. The legal foundations for cooperation, private trade, and then the privatization of state property had to be created almost from scratch and in a short time, since the early formation of market relations in the country, according to the plan of the reformers, was a guarantor of the irreversibility of democratic processes. But in this case, it's not even surprising that Sobchak was at the right time and in the right place, but the fact that, having received the degree of candidate, and then the doctor of law, the title of professor and the position of head of the department at a prestigious university, Anatoly Alexandrovich remained nonpartisan. In those days when communist ideology dominated, it was simply unthinkable to make a career without being a member of the CPSU, especially in jurisprudence. The older generation remembers this very well. It's hard to believe, but the facts are a stubborn thing. The legal scholar Sobchak became a member of the CPSU only in June 1988, when general dissatisfaction with the dominance of the partyocracy was already rising on the wave of glasnost, when the whole country started talking about Boris Yeltsin, who staged his first démarche at the October Plenum Central Committee, and joining the party was considered almost idiocy. But Professor Sobchak was clearly not an idiot. Then why did he need it? More precisely, who needed it and why? The fact is that in 1990, the Leningrad comrades elected the communist Sobchak a delegate to the 28th Congress of the CPSU, at which he made a fiery speech, stigmatizing the retrograde Yegor Ligachev, who at that time was a member of the Politburo of the Central Committee of the CPSU, which rendered an invaluable service to the reformer, to Mikhail Gorbachev. Yegor Kuzmich was never re-elected to the Central Committee, after which he finally lost his influence in the party. Although with such a meager party experience as Sobchak had at that time, one could become a delegate to the Congress, having accomplished perhaps some kind of labor or military feat. You don't have to be a dick in your forehead to understand. Sobchak was specifically asked to join the CPSU so that he would have a formal basis for participating in key party forums, where he was assigned a special role. And to ask for this, and not only to ask, but to organize everything properly at the level of the Leningrad City Committee. At that time only one organization could do it, the KGB, where they quickly orientated themselves in the changing political situation and decided to act proactively. Probably realizing that this moment in his biography could raise a lot of questions, Anatoly Sobchak would later write in his book of memoirs, AA to everyone, and therefore to me personally, a call for civil mobilization, sounded from the rostrum of the 19th Party Conference. That's right, this party conference took place on June 28 to July 1, 1988, when, for example, at the very end of June, Sobchak was admitted to the party. But Professor Sobchak submitted his application for joining the CPSU to the Party Committee of Leningrad State University a year earlier, in May 1987, that is, even before the October plenum of the Central Committee, at which Boris Yeltsin sharply criticized the party leadership. In other words, at that time one could only dream of such radical changes in party life. Mismatch occurs. If you can't prevent change, you need to lead it. In the second half of the 1980s, such a banally simple and at the same time wise principle was adopted by the Chekists, who for a long time, remaining in the shadows, not only continued to keep the situation under control, but also built the configuration of the new political regime they needed in country. A special role in this hidden process was played by the Directorate of the KGB of the USSR for Leningrad and the Leningrad region, which at that time was led by General Kalugin as the first deputy chief. Kalugin. The role of the disgraced KGB General Oleg Kalugin in the collapse of the communist regime and the formation of a new ruling elite is difficult to overestimate, but not everyone understands this now. Oleg Danilovich himself, who now lives in the United States, is modestly silent about his merits, focusing the attention of the interested public, mainly on scandalous details that arouse intense public interest, but do not make it possible to understand the whole algorithm of the special operation he carried out, which ultimately led to change of political regime in our country. Another 20 to 30 years will pass, and the name of General Kalugin will be inscribed in gold in the history of the US CIA next to such names as Alan Welsh Dulles, Alexander Yakovlev, or Vladimir Kryukov. But let's not rush things, everything has its time. In the Russian edition of the first book of Boris Yeltsin's memoirs, B.N. Yeltsin. Confession on a given topic. Moscow, 1990, for some reason, there is no fragment, amazing in its frankness, which at the time of publication of the memoirs dictated to Valentin Yumashev did not become, yes, and could not be fatal to the author's political career. However, in the Norwegian edition of Confessions, this fragment is present. The researcher and publicist Nikolai Zenkovich drew attention to this circumstance, who, in his two-volume book dedicated to the hidden aspects of the biography of the first president of Russia, N.A. Zenkovich. Boris Yeltsin, Different Lives. Book 1. The Kremlin Disobedient. Moscow, 2001, quoted a deleted from Russian edition excerpt. What exactly are we talking about? Yeltsin recalls his first student vacation, when he traveled around the country, for lack of money for travel, on the roof of a train and ended up in Moscow. Looking at the movie poster of the Moscow State University Club, he accidentally met two girls, Lida and Luda, who studied at the Faculty of Geography. They invited him to Mariina Roscha, where they lived together in a communal apartment. For Lida's birthday, she just lacked a gentleman. We entered a two-story wooden house. Oleska was already waiting for us at the entrance, an inconspicuous-looking guy, a little younger than me, dressed in a decent Moscow sewing suit. He had a bouquet of flowers in his hand. Luda screamed and threw herself into his arms, Yeltsin recalls. Further, the new friends pretty much drank and began to dance to the Polish jazz, which started Oleska on the gramophone. Dancing with the attractive Lida, the young Yeltsin, according to his recollections, even experienced erotic pleasure, and at the same time, the inconvenience of his own uncouthness. The second couple, Oleg and Luda, only fueled the flared desire. They stood in the corner and passionately kissed. But the main thing in this frivolous episode, reminiscent of a fragment from the film Dandies, was still not that. The further course of events, according to Yeltsin, is described in great detail. Suddenly, with a roar, window glass shattered. A heavy boulder flew into the room. A drunken voice was heard from behind the window. "Hey, Lidjaha! Have you forgotten me, you slut? Who are you playing with?" I rushed to the window. Lida's face was distorted with a grimace of disgust. "Vaska Kirpity, freak. Came back from camp a month ago, pestering you brute all the time. I'll call the police." "What kind of police? I'll deal with him myself," I said and headed for the door. "Wait, Boris. There are 5 of them, I'll go with you." Oleg grabbed my shoulder. "Where are you guys?" "They have knives," the girls shouted. But we were already outside. Vaska, a short red-haired fellow in a dirty vest and a cap on one side, bent down, picking out another cobblestone. When he saw us, he grinned obscenely. But before he could swing for a blow, I pushed him so hard in the chest that he flew off against the wall. I went up to him and said clearly, "I warn you, do not do this." "Behind!" shouted Oleg. I did not have time to turn around and felt a deafening blow to the head. For a second I was unconscious, and when I came to my senses, I saw the boot of a crooked Tatar, brought over my chest. Dodged. Oleska at that time fought off 3 hooligans. How much agility in it! He eluded all blows. Here one fell, Oleska drove into his groin. The second one was knocked out with a hook and kicked in the back of the head. The Tatar pulled out a knife from his top and went to Oleg. He calmly and strongly grabbed his hand and turned the criminal with his whole body. There was a crunch of bones. The Tatar howled, standing on all 4s. Oleg knocked him over with a kick in the ass and brushed off the suit. "Let them know, bastards, how to contact the security officers." I looked around. The Tartar and another bastard lay on the ground and howled. The rest, including Vaska Kirpity, disappeared. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" I respectfully asked him. "I am a cadet of the School of State Security. We are taught jiu-jitsu," answered Oleska. We returned to the girls and stayed with them until the first roosters. I never saw Oleska again. In the late autumn of 1989, at a meeting with voters, I saw a man who reminded me of someone. He came up to me and offered his hand. Boris Nikolaevich. And I know you. he said smiling. Do you remember Mariana Roscha, the 53rd year? Oleska? He is the best, my interlocutor laughed. Retired KGB Major General Oleg Danilovich Kalugin. It should be noted that this excerpt from Yeltsin's early memoirs is almost the only fragment of his memoirs written out with such literary thoroughness. Let's leave aside the artistic merit of this text. What is striking in it, as already mentioned, is completely different, namely, the abundance of details that Yeltsin, being then drunk and bruised in the head, miraculously remembered after almost 40 years. The names of casual acquaintances, the details of the wardrobe and the situation in the room, the number of hooligans and the nickname of their leader, hand-to-hand combat techniques, and so on. Nevertheless, it was this very readable fragment that was not included in the canonical text of Boris Yeltsin's memoirs, published in the Soviet Union in hundreds of thousands of copies. Who and why needed to censor Yeltsin's confession? To answer this difficult question, it is necessary to bring together some circumstances from the life of both Yeltsin himself and Kalugin. Judging by the text of this fragment, the events described took place in the cold summer of 1953, when a large amnesty was announced in the country, and hundreds of thousands of criminals poured into the cities and villages of the vast motherland. True, both capitals were closed to them, which, however, did not prevent them from making a rustle there too. In 1953, Boris Yeltsin was 22 years old. At that time he was a fourth-year student of the Ural Polytechnic Institute. CM, Kirov, which he entered in 1950, so for him the events described could not have happened during the first student holidays. But student Yeltsin, as a member of the national team of Sverdlovsk, which then played in the major leagues, regularly traveled to various cities for volleyball competitions, including Leningrad. By the way, about the city on the Neva. In the summer of 1953, Oleg Kalugin was only 18 years old. He was a student of the second year of the Leningrad Institute of Foreign Languages of the USSR Ministry of State Security. In fact, he was in the position of a person liable for military service, who was doing urgent military service. Therefore, even on a dismissal day, he could not leave the city of Leningrad. It is even more impossible to imagine that Cadet Kalugin could commit AWOL, and even to Moscow, given his excellent track record. Consequently, in 1953, the first meeting of the future curator of the democracy movement in the USSR and the future first president of Russia could only take place in the city of Leningrad, where the volleyball player Yeltsin, as part of the national team of his city, could come to the championship of the RSFSR. Passing operational practice at the KGB in the city of Leningrad and the Leningrad region, in the Department of Counterintelligence in Transport, Cadet Kalugin could well have received an operational task to recruit as an unspoken employee of some visitor who had fairly extensive connections in his environment. Boris Yeltsin could turn out to be just such a visiting student activist, by a coincidence of circumstances, whose recruitment went to Kalugin in the credit. Now it is difficult to say exactly how, under what circumstances, this training recruitment took place. But only if their first meeting was arranged in exactly the way described above, there is no doubt that Yeltsin's accidental acquaintance with unmarried girls and the subsequent raid of movie hooligans, who were famously scattered by the superhero Oleska, were the most common staging, the basics of which were taught to future Chekists on the course by teachers from JIDIS or VGIK. Just 5 years later, in 1958, the young Chekist Kalugin, while on an operational internship at Columbia University in New York, USA, in the same group with Alexander Yakovlev, the future secretary of the CPSU Central Committee for Ideology, and at that time a graduate student of the Academy of Social Sciences under the Central Committee of the CPSU, he re-recruits the Soviet defector Anatoly Kutushkin, agent Cook, who worked in the largest American chemical association, Tiakal, on secret solid fuel for strategic missiles. After this brilliantly conducted special operation inspired by the CIA, Officer Kalugin makes a quick career in the system of the first main directorate of the KGB of the USSR, after which he is sent to work in the USSR Committee on Radio Broadcasting, where he not only provides operational cover for intelligence officers traveling abroad under the guise international journalists, but also studies in detail all aspects of the impact of the mass media on Soviet society. The Allen Dulles Plan for the collapse of the USSR from within, the reality of which is still in doubt among many, has begun to acquire its visible features. Beginning in the summer of 1960, the KGB officer Kalugin, without diplomatic status, worked in the United States under the guise of a correspondent for Moscow Radio, from where he returned only in 1964, after the Special Services eliminated John F. Kennedy in America, and removed him from power in the Soviet Union. Nikita Khrushchev. Oleg Kalugin's further career growth is directly related to his stay in the United States, where he extremely successfully implemented various intelligence and counterintelligence operations, receiving regular promotions and high state awards of the USSR. In total, for all his service in the KGB, Oleg Kalugin was awarded 22 orders and medals. In 1974, at the age of 40, Kalugin received the military rank of Major General, becoming the youngest general in the KGB system. Only once, in the mid-1970s, Oleg Kalugin, being the head of the Foreign Counterintelligence Department of the PGU of the KGB of the USSR, together with his patron, Vladimir Kryukov, who at that time was the head of the first main directorate of the KGB of the USSR, responsible for foreign intelligence, was on the brink of death, when the Soviet intelligence agent Nikolai Artemonov, LARK agent, recruited by the Americans, whom the KGB leadership decided to secretly kidnap and deliver to the USSR, could give evidence that cast a shadow of suspicion on both generals. But LARK, whose abduction was led by Kalugin, died unexpectedly from an overdose of an anesthetic. For the successfully carried out operation, Major General Oleg Kalugin in 1975, on the proposal of his boss, Vladimir Kryukov, was awarded the Order of the Red Banner of War. Nevertheless, a strange set of circumstances connected with the death of LARK forced the internal counterintelligence of the KGB to conduct a thorough analysis of all stages of Kalugin's work abroad, including raising the case of Agent Cook, 1958. Anatoly Kutushkin, who returned to his homeland and became an employee of the Institute of World Economy and International Relations, IMIMO, of the USSR Academy of Sciences, whose director Alexander Yakovlev will be appointed in 1983, was taken into development by counterintelligence officers of the KGB in Moscow and the Moscow region. Under the pretext of suppressing a deal provoked by the Chekists themselves, which included foreign exchange transactions, buying up and trying to export art treasures abroad, Kukutushkin was arrested and later convicted. Moreover, the initiator of the isolation of Kuk, apparently, was Vladimir Kryukov, who became deputy chairman of the KGB of the USSR in 1978, who, fearing that Kutushkin's testimony against Kalugin was fraught with exposure of himself, decided with the help of the unsuspecting head of the Moscow KGB Viktor Alydin turn the problem with the agent into a criminal plane. Oleg Kalugin, hiding the fact of his cooperation with the CIA, as well as the role of Vladimir Kryukov in these events, still continues to assert, while defending Kutushkin from false accusations, he himself was unreasonably under suspicion, which put an end to his future career in foreign intelligence. It should be noted that the Cook story happened at a time when an internal investigation had not yet been completed into another episode that cast a shadow on the head of the Foreign Counterintelligence Department of the PGU KGB, Oleg Kalugin, who did not take proper measures in a timely manner against the Deputy Secretary General of the UN Arkady Shevchenko, who refused to return to the USSR in 1978 after completing his business trip to the United States, although Yuri Drozdov, a KGB resident in New York, warned Kalugin about the impending provocation. Later it turned out that the Soviet diplomat Shevchenko had been working for the CIA almost since 1973. Shevchenko's betrayal hit the reputation of Andrei Gromyko, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the USSR and a member of the Politburo of the Central Committee of the CPSU, whose personal assistant until his new appointment was a defector. As a result, the chairman of the KGB of the USSR, Yuri Andropov, in 1980 transferred General Kalugin from the central apparatus of the KGB to the Territorial Department of State Security, a second position of the first deputy head of the KGB for the city of Leningrad, and the Leningrad region was specially created for him, where he continues to work under the auspices of Kryukov. As the curator of the Internal Security Department of the Leningrad KGB, General Kalugin had access to all the personal files of the directorate's employees, among whom at that time was Vladimir Putin. At this point, we must interrupt our story about Oleg Kalugin in order to return to him after how a person will be brought to the forefront of the described events, eventually becoming the main person involved in the big game, Putin. The history of Oleg Kalugin's relationship with Vladimir Putin, especially for the latter, has always been a closed topic. Having become the director of the FSB of Russia in July 1998, Vladimir Putin, presumably, carried out a thorough revision of the official archives in order to exclude in the future the appearance of documents testifying to the very fact of such cooperation. Therefore, inquisitive researchers of the recent past associated with the history of the special services, in such a situation, can only hope for their own intuition and logic, using publicly available sources of information. So, what in common, besides the former involvement in the KGB, can ex-General Kalugin, convicted in absentia for high treason, and the second president of Russia have in common? As you know, after graduating from school, Vladimir Putin in 1970 to 1975 studied at the International Department of the Law Faculty of Leningrad State University, Zhdanov, where a lot of career intelligence officers came from. It was there, while still a student, that he came to the attention of Associate Professor Sobchak, who, as mentioned above, had been collaborating with the KGB for several years. After graduating from Leningrad State University, international lawyer Vladimir Putin was assigned to serve in the KGB of the USSR without certification in the Operational Officer Corps. This was preceded by a recruiting conversation that took place with student Putin even before he received his diploma. Here is how Vladimir Putin himself recalls it. In my fourth year, one person came out to me and offered to meet. True, this man did not say who he was, but somehow I immediately understood everything. Because he says, "We are talking about your future distribution, and I want to talk to you about this topic." I don't want to say where yet. This is where I screwed everything up. If he does not want to say where, then go there. When I accepted the proposal of that employee of the personnel department of the office, he, however, turned out not to be a personnel officer, but an employee of the unit that served universities. I did not think about repressions. My ideas about the KGB arose from romantic stories about the work of intelligence officers. Without any exaggeration, I could be considered a successful product of the patriotic education of a Soviet person. But after a conversation in the lobby, everything suddenly calmed down. That person is gone. Already the commission on distribution on a nose. And then another call. Welcome to the Human Resources Department of the university. Dmitry Gantsarov talked to me. I remember his last name. He had the first initial conversation with me on the eve of distribution, N. Gevorkian, N. Timokova, Kolesnikov. In the first person, Conversations with Vladimir Putin. Moscow, 2000. Apparently, Vladimir Putin first came to the attention of employees of the 3rd Department of the 5th Directorate of the KGB of the USSR, the 3rd Department, which was subordinate to the special departments in universities, exercised control over students and teachers, and also worked through student exchange. The employees of this department were engaged in recruiting informants in the student and teaching environment. In addition, they carried out the initial stage of recruiting for the personnel needs of the KGB, compiling basic characteristics for potential applicants. As you know, initiators, that is, citizens who independently expressed a desire to become Chekists, were then practically not taken to serve in the KGB, which Putin himself points out in his revelations, recalling how he, while still in the 9th grade, with this request, he came to the reception room of the Leningrad KGB on Lytiny. The fact that his paternal grandfather, Spiridon, worked as a cook, first in Gorky, where the Ulyanov family lived, and then at one of Stalin's dachas, was of no small importance for the decision to attract Putin to the KGB. And Putin's father himself, Vladimir Spiridonovich, fought in the ranks of the NKVD fighter battalion during the Great Patriotic War. These battalions were engaged in sabotage in the rear of the German troops. So Vladimir Putin, albeit with a big stretch, but in a certain sense can be called a hereditary Chekist. After receiving a diploma from Leningrad State University in 1975, Vladimir Putin was first registered with the Secretariat of the Leningrad KGB, and then transferred to the Counterintelligence Unit, where he served for about 5 months, doing mainly clerical work. He filed some cases, recalls Putin. Then, at the end of the year, he was sent to a 6-month training course for the operational staff of the KGB of the USSR on Okta, School 401, which he graduated in 1976, after which he continued to serve in counterintelligence in the investigative department of the Leningrad KGB. By the way, it was in this year that he became the champion of Leningrad in judo. As can be assumed, at that time Chekist Putin was actively involved in special measures aimed at combating the dissident movement in Leningrad, which Western intelligence agencies, not without reason, considered as one of the key factors in subversive activities in the USSR. Remember what exactly was the most effective method of work of the KGB of the USSR in relation to the manifestation of various forms of civic activity, outlined at the beginning of our story. In order to neutralize such manifestations, they need to be led. Here is how Vladimir Putin himself recalls this, not without irony. They acted as if from around the corner so that their ears would not stick out, God forbid. I will tell just one story as an example. Suppose a group of dissidents is going to hold some kind of event in Leningrad. For example, time to coincide with the birthday of Peter the Great. Dissidents in St. Petersburg, in general, timed their events to such dates. They also loved the anniversaries of the Decembrists. We conceived, therefore, an event with an invitation to the place of the event of the diplomatic corps, journalists, in order to attract the attention of the world community. What to do? You cannot overclock, it is not ordered. Then they took it and organized the laying of wreaths themselves, and just at the place where the journalists were supposed to come. They convened the regional committee, trade unions, cordoned off everything with the police, they themselves came to the music. Have entrusted. Journalists and representatives of the diplomatic corps stood, looked, yawned a couple of times and dispersed. And when they dispersed, the cordon was removed. Please go if you want. But no one is interested anymore, from the first person. How do you like such a political technique, brilliantly tested by the KGB more than 30 years ago? Doesn't this remind you, even today, of the laying of flowers by Prime Minister Vladimir Putin on the grave of the murdered Spartak fan Yegor Sviridov, when thousands of radical young people, outraged by this crime and ready for public protests, were pushed back from the venue ceremony by a police cordon? And is it any wonder that Putin's methods of managed democracy are like 2 drops of water reminiscent of the tactics of the Chekists of the Leningrad KGB? Hence such a Jesuit attitude towards human rights activists such as Lyudmila Alexieva, for whom, during the reign of Vladimir Putin, demonstrative enclosures were created in the form of various public chambers and councils under the president, mockingly called civil society institutions. It can be assumed that at the time of the events described, Vladimir Putin served together with Viktor Cherksov in the 5th Department of the Leningrad KGB, which, through the 5th Directorate of the KGB of the USSR, was engaged in the fight against ideological sabotage. After graduating from the same faculty of the Leningrad State University as Putin, but only 2 years earlier, in 1973, Cherksov did military service in the Leningrad Military District for the next 2 years. After that he worked in the prosecutor's office for several months, and in 1975, simultaneously with Putin, was enrolled in the staff of the KGB in Leningrad and the Leningrad region. By the way, until now, many authors mistakenly believe that Putin and Cherksov studied together on the same course of the law faculty of Leningrad State University and were friends almost from the students' bench. Viktor Cherksov began his service in the KGB as an operative of the Moscow Regional Department of the KGB for the city of Leningrad and the Leningrad region. Then he was an investigator of the same 5th Department of the KGB, Heels, as the Chekists called him, where he rose to the position of deputy chief, and then the head of the department. Is it not in this investigation department that Vladimir Putin served, who does not want to remember what exactly he had to do then? And the employees of the 5th Department of the KGB dealt with various kinds of dissidents, human rights activists, free artists, and other Democrats, with their anti-Soviet samizdat, who were fed by the intelligentsia of St. Petersburg, traditionally distinguished by their passionarity, posing a constant threat to state foundations since the time of the Decembrists. Among the most high-profile cases, which in the late 1970s and early 1980s were sewn to St. Petersburg intellectuals by Chekists from the Fifth Department, we can recall the case of the publishers of the religious magazine Obshchina and its editor Vladimir Porish, as well as the case of Alexander Ogorodnikov, 1979 year. The case of Leningrad feminist activists Galina Grigorieva and Natalia Maltseva, 1980. The case of the independent trade union Free Interprofessional Association of Workers. FMU, in 1981 to 1982. In addition, Viktor Cherksov handled the cases of members of the SMOT and the People's Labor Union, NTS, Rostislav Evdokimov and Mark Morozov, who died in prison, and in 1983 led a team investigating the case of philologist Mikhail Mylak, who was guilty only of editing foreign editions of Daniil Karm's. Of course, as mentioned above, humanities scientists from Leningrad universities, including nonpartisan associate professor of Leningrad State University Anatoly Sobchak, as well as participants in informal youth movements and creative associations, rock musicians and poets who arranged, kvarterniki, mitki artists, and so on. On a special account, as is now known, was the famous Leningrad Rock Club, where in those days, as a high school student, most likely, a big fan of Western hard rock, Dmitry Medvedev, the future third president of Russia, hung out. But the real heyday of the Leningrad rock movement under the supervision of the KGB came only when General Kalugin gave it the go-ahead. At the time of Oleg Kalugin's appointment as the second first deputy head of the KGB Directorate for Leningrad and the Leningrad region, in 1980, Vladimir Putin, who had completed a year of training at the Faculty of Retraining Operational Personnel at the Higher School of the KGB. F.E. Dzerzhinsky has already returned to the city on the Neva, where he continued his service in the first department of the Leningrad KGB under the scrutiny of the disgraced general. So Oleg Kalugin, lecturing in the United States, is clearly disingenuous, stating that Vladimir Putin in those years was an inconspicuous gray mouse who sat in the office of the administration, and that he practically does not remember him. Also puzzling is Kalugin's statement that Putin has never served in foreign intelligence. It was General Kalugin who, most likely, recommended his subordinate, Major of Justice Putin, to undergo training at the one-year faculty of the Red Banner. U.V. Andropov Institute of the KGB of the USSR, which he graduated in 1985 with a degree in foreign intelligence. But since, due to the above circumstances, all Kalugin's protégés automatically fell under the special control of counterintelligence, Chekist Putin could no longer count on operational work in capitalist countries, where the capabilities of the Directorate K of the PGU of the KGB of the USSR were limited. That is why, apparently, he was sent to serve in the Territorial Intelligence Point in Dresden under the cover of the post of Director of the Local House of Friendship of the USSR, GDR. In addition, in the KGB-KI, Putin improved his German, hoping in his heart that he would still be sent to Germany. But no luck. Vladimir Putin stayed in the GDR until 1990, rising to the rank of lieutenant colonel and the position of senior assistant to the head of the department. In his years, Kalugin was a colonel and held a much higher and more responsible position in the structure of the KGB of the USSR. After completing a business trip abroad and returning to his homeland, Lieutenant Colonel Putin is transferred to the active reserve of the KGB of the USSR without being given any position. Later, having already become president, Vladimir Putin will say that at that time he himself refused to transfer to the central office of the PGU of the KGB of the USSR in Moscow and returned to the staff of the first department of the KGB for Leningrad and the Leningrad region. Although, according to Kalugin's statement, made by him during a public lecture held in New Jersey, USA, in 2010, Putin, having saved up money in Germany, bought a car with them and was engaged in private cabs in St. Petersburg until he joined Sobchak's team. It is more readily believed in the Kalugin version, but not because of greater confidence in the source, but for the reason that we indicated above. At the same time, Oleg Kalugin, speaking of Putin having nailed to the Democrats, is again modest, omitting his own role in this coincidence of circumstances. Jesters. Yuri Shutov, whose book of memoirs has been repeatedly cited above, is perhaps the most mythologized figure among those who fall into the field of view of researchers of the St. Petersburg phenomenon. On the one hand, this is facilitated by the inaccessibility of objective information about this person and the inconsistency of the information that is made public. And on the other hand, Yuri Taitovich himself had a hand in this, who in his memoirs, skillfully drawing the monstrous image of Sobchak, with the ingenuity of the classics of socialist realism, erased from the history of the democratization of Leningrad everything that could cast a shadow on the main characters of modern Russian politics. However, it is difficult to blame him for this. As already mentioned, 65-year-old Yuri Shutov is currently serving a life sentence in the Solikamsk prison, infamously known as the White Swan. He is almost the only prisoner in Russia whose books are published and enjoy constant success with readers. Which, in turn, gave rise to a lot of questions both to the author himself and about how a recidivist criminal, serving a life sentence in the most severe prison in the country, can be so actively engaged in political journalism. The biography of Yuri Shutov himself is more like the plot of an adventurous novel. As deputy head of the Central Statistical Office for Leningrad and the Leningrad region, in the mid-1980s he was convicted of setting fire to one of the Smolny offices, as well as embezzling a large amount, after which Yuri Shutov was sentenced to 5 years in prison. After serving his sentence, he not only managed to achieve rehabilitation, but also made himself a powerful PR by a commissioned publication in the then super-popular Ogonyak magazine. The author of this article, Mark Grigoriev, proved to the reader that the criminal case against Shutov was fabricated by order of stealing Soviet officials. Investigator Valentina Kornilova, who was in charge of the Shutov case, was going to sue him, but in February 1991, the journalist died tragically during a terrible fire in the Leningrad hotel. Yuri Shutov can be attributed to the category of citizens who were called Beatles at the end of the Soviet era, with the widest range of business and nomenclature connections. This hyperactive, necessary person, capable of solving any problem, resembled the protagonist from the film Prohindiata, or Running on Place, brilliantly played by Alexander Kalayachin. A staunch Sybarite, a connoisseur of St. Petersburg restaurants and classical music, having recently been released from prison, he was already driving around the streets of Leningrad in his Mercedes and did not deny himself anything. At the end of 1989, Yuri Shutov became an assistant to the People's Deputy of the USSR, member of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, chairman of the Subcommittee on Economic Legislation of the Committee on Legislation, Law and Order of the USSR Armed Forces Anatoly Sobchak. Moreover, the initiator of such cooperation between the former convict, as they say now, under the economic article, and the ideologist of economic reforms, according to Shutov's memoirs, was Sobchak himself. Who exactly recommended Sobchak to take Shutov as his assistant remains a mystery. Given the long track record of Yuri Shutov and the interest that the Leningrad KGB showed in Anatoly Sobchak, it can be assumed that the person who supervised Sobchak through the 5th Department and who, of course, possessed information could act as a guarantor in such a delicate issue about the fact that Shutov himself has been secretly collaborating with the KGB for more than a year. By the way, Yuri Taitovich does not cover this topic at all in his memoirs, preferring to make fun of Sobchak, who, according to Shutov, was constantly afraid of being exposed as a sexist. For some reason, Patron was irresistibly drawn to the then still tightly closed KGB archive. In general, this was a friendly impulse of many well-known Democrats, who quite transparently hinted to the dull and confused Chekists that it would be desirable to destroy all the committee archives en masse. Moreover, it is necessary, along with folders under the single-name agent's work file, and other traces of many years of cooperation with the KGB of the hinters themselves. Otherwise, it is inexplicably strange for the victors to destroy the archives of the vanquished, where, on the contrary, one could find a lot of interesting things, Yuri Shutov recalls not without sarcasm. In May 1990, Yuri Shutov became an assistant to Anatoly Sobchak as chairman of the Leningrad City Council and moved to the Mariinsky Palace. Being privy to the most delicate issues of the personal life and professional activities of his patron, he helped Sobchak to build various administrative and economic schemes and financial combinations that create the initial capital of the St. Petersburg team then being formed. shortly before the election of Anatoly Sobchak as the first mayor of St. Palmyra. Moreover, Anatoly Sobchak, having become the mayor and having concentrated in his hands all the reins of the executive power of the city, discovered for himself and his inner circle absolutely new opportunities for material enrichment, access to which, according to St. The first person they decided to get rid of was, too active, Yuri Shutov, who was immediately fired as soon as the game went big. The formal reason for his resignation was the obviously impossible contract he signed with an English bankrupt businessman, who was considered as an investor in the project to create the Leningrad Free Economic Zone. Although Yuri Titovich himself, in the book of memoirs he wrote, indicates completely different reasons for the resignation, namely, his fundamental disagreements with Sobchak in moral, ethical and even political terms, which even now looks extremely unconvincing, given Shutov's life experience. It is difficult to believe that he once experienced naive illusions about the moral character of those who reached the heights of power, and was captivated by romantic ideas about the essence of the political processes taking place then. Having received his resignation, Yuri Shutov plunged headlong into gangster Petersburg, and already at the beginning of 1992 he was arrested as part of a whole gang that was engaged in extortion and resolved delicate issues, as they say, in disputes between business entities. However, later he was released on bail, and in 1996 he was completely acquitted, due to insufficient evidence. It must be assumed that such a thoughtful person as Shutov did not act at his own peril and risk, but worked under reliable cover of the Chekists, and therefore escaped with a slight fright. Like last time, having passed a criminal record, Yuri Shutov, as you might guess, not without the help of his patrons from the office, takes another very influential position, namely, he becomes the head of the working group for St. Petersburg and the Leningrad region, created under the State Duma for initiative of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation and the Liberal Democratic Party of the Interim Commission for the analysis of the results of privatization in 1992 to 1996, and responsibility of officials for their negative results. At that time, the territorial divisions of this commission operated in many regions of Russia, under the guise of the opposition's populist slogan about revising the results of the Chubai privatization, in essence, attempts to redistribute property. And Shutov, in the role of the gunner of this commission in the city on the Neva, was an indispensable person for the Chekists. The clash of business interests of the Siloviki and Shutov's participation in these disassemblies eventually led to the death of the vice-governor of St. Petersburg, Mikhail Manovich, who was also the chairman of the City Committee for City Property Management. Manovich has been involved in the privatization of state property in the northern capital since 1992, working under the leadership of Anatoly Chubai in the team of Mayor Sobchak. In August 1997, Mikhail Manovich, who was driving to work in his company car in the morning, at the intersection of Rubinstein Street and Nevsky Prospect, came under aimed automatic fire. Having received 5 bullets, he died on the way to the hospital. Until November 2009, this crime was never officially disclosed, and the investigation of the case was repeatedly extended until the opportunity presented itself to lay responsibility for organizing this contract killing on Yuri Shutov. Medvedev. In the book by Boris Mazo, already mentioned by us, St. Petersburg Against Moscow, or Who Surrounded by V.V. Putin, published back in 2003, in the short chapter, The Inner Circle, there are amazing lines that now resonate quite strongly with the usual media image of Dmitry Medvedev. But after all, only 8 years have passed, and so much has already been forgotten. Let us quote these lines. Alexei Miller and Dmitry Medvedev worked in the Committee for External Relations of the St. Petersburg City Hall, when it was headed by Putin. Moreover, the publications emphasize that it is difficult to attribute Medvedev to the team of St. Petersburg liberals. He, like Sekin, is closely connected with the St. Petersburg Chekists, highlighted by us. Author. So, they say that he has a special relationship with Nikolai Patrushev. When you read the 4th chapter of our book, remember these lines. The version that Vladimir Putin and Dmitry Medvedev could have known each other quite well before 1990 has been repeatedly expressed by various authors. We will turn to the tablets, in other words, to the memoirs of Vladimir Vladimirovich and Dmitry Anatolyevich. And here, too, there are many curious contradictions and omissions. There are two, so to speak, canonical versions in public circulation about exactly how Putin met Medvedev. The author of the first version is Vladimir Putin himself, who spoke about his acquaintance with Dmitry Medvedev in the book, From the First Person. Conversations with Vladimir Putin, chapter, Politician, subchapter, with whom there is a feeling of comradeship. Here is what Vladimir Vladimirovich said at the beginning of 2000 about his acquaintance with Dmitry Anatolyevich. He worked at the Department of Civil Law at Leningrad University, a candidate of legal sciences, an expert of a good level. While working with Sobchak, I needed people there, in the mayor's office. I came to the law faculty for help, and they offered me Dima. When I was deputy mayor, he was my advisor. He worked for a year and a half. And then, after those unsuccessful elections, he, naturally, after some time left the mayor's office and returned to the university. To understand the chronology, a few explanations are necessary. Unsuccessful elections. This is the election of the governor of St. Petersburg, held on July 3, 1996, during which Anatoly Sobchak lost the victory to his deputy, Vladimir Yakovlev. After that, both Putin and many other prominent representatives of the Sobchak team left the mayor's office of St. Petersburg. Recall that Anatoly Sobchak was elected chairman of the Leningrad City Council on May 23, 1990. On June 12, 1991, in the elections held simultaneously with the first elections of the president of the RSFSR, Sobchak was elected mayor of St. Petersburg. On June 28, 1991, Mayor Sobchak creates the Committee for External Relations of the St. Petersburg City Hall, appointing Vladimir Putin as its chairman. From this position, with subsequent prefixes, in 1992, Deputy Mayor of St. Petersburg, since March 1994, First Deputy Prime Minister of St. Petersburg, since 1995, First Deputy Mayor of St. Petersburg, Vladimir Putin left in August 1996. In other words, as follows from Putin's memoirs, Medvedev worked as an advisor to the Committee on Foreign Relations for a year and a half before Sobchak's defeat in the 1996 elections. That is, approximately from the end of 1994, the beginning of 1995. But Putin met Medvedev, as can be understood from the memoirs of Vladimir Vladimirovich, earlier, in the period 1990 to 1991, when Sobchak served as chairman of the Leningrad City Council, and Putin was his advisor. The biography of Dmitry Medvedev on the official website of the President of the Russian Federation says about his work during this period, in 1990 to 1995, advisor to the chairman of the Leningrad City Council, expert of the Committee for External Relations of the St. Petersburg Mayor's Office. Thus, from the official version of the biography of Dmitry Medvedev, it turns out that he left the City Hall not in 1996, as Vladimir Putin recalls, but about a year earlier. But, that's not the point. Dmitry Medvedev himself recalls his meeting with Vladimir Putin in a slightly different vein, N. Svanets, M. Svanets. Medvedev. St. Petersburg, 2008. Chapter, about the Sobchak team. Sobchak, with whom Medvedev, as a student at Leningrad State University, went for potatoes, called his former student himself in August 1990, inviting him to work in the Leningrad City Council. Dmitry Medvedev came to the Mariinsky Palace in the autumn of 1990 and took up the post of advisor to the chairman of the Leningrad City Council on a wide range of issues. Most likely, this happened in September, when Medvedev, having defended his PhD thesis, returned from vacation. Recalling that period, Dmitry Anatolyevich says that he had to deal mainly with legal issues. But about the meeting and work with Vladimir Putin, Dmitry Medvedev tells a little different than Putin himself recalled in 2000. A month later, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin appeared there. As a much more experienced and professionally trained person, after a while he became the head of a group of assistants and advisors to the chairman of the Leningrad City Council. That is, he became a senior among advisors. And in this capacity, we worked side by side for a year. In other words, Putin came to the Leningrad City Council later than Medvedev, somewhere in October 1990, and together they worked side by side until approximately October-November 1991, and then, when Sobchak was elected mayor on June 12, 1991 Petersburg, then still Leningrad, Putin went to work in the mayor's office in the newly created Committee on Foreign Relations. Medvedev, in the fall of 1991, did not want to go to work in the executive body of the municipal government. Dmitry Anatolyevich explained his decision in 2008 as follows: "At that time, I had the feeling that I had exhausted myself in this area. I don't know why it arose, but, in any case, it began to seem to me that I should do something else: science, practical jurisprudence. A very strange confession. After all, it was a period when new legislation was being developed, new legal foundations for municipal government were laid on the basis of practical, everyday experience. Work in the mayor's office of one of the largest cities in the USSR provided an excellent opportunity to combine theory with practice." Moreover, Medvedev did not leave teaching at the law faculty of the Leningrad State University. The need to combine theory with practice was indirectly recognized by Dmitry Medvedev himself. In a conversation with Nikolai and Marina Svanets, he, recalling the beginning of his teaching career at the Faculty of Law of the Leningrad State University, chapter, on studying at the university, noticed that in the early 1990s students have become such that if you don't prepare, you will look like a complete layman. It is one thing to talk about the right, as it was customary to say, of developed socialism. And another thing is to talk about the law of the period of perestroika. Everything was dynamic. There were a lot of new things. Nevertheless, in October-November 1991, Medvedev distanced himself from work in the mayor's office and, as he himself notes, completely returned to the Department of Civil Law. True, he agrees with Putin that he will work on a freelance basis as an expert of the Committee on Foreign Relations. Medvedev recalls that in Smolny, where the mayor's office was located, he appeared once or twice a week and talked with Putin on a wide range of issues. And in this form, Dmitry Medvedev recalled in 2008, "We worked for 4 years, until Sobchak's team left Smolny following the election results." The most odious representatives of the notorious Sobchak team, as we remember, began to leave Smolny immediately after the July 3, 1996 elections. Medvedev, as the above quote from the memoirs of Dmitry Anatolyevich himself and as follows from the official biography of the third president of the Russian Federation on the website of the head of the Russian state, was an advisor to the chairman of the Leningrad City Council and a freelance expert of the Putin Committee on Foreign Relations. Medvedev was 5 years old. And in the period from October-November 1991 for 4 years, respectively, the maximum, until the beginning of 1996, Medvedev, being a freelance expert of Putin's FAC, appeared in Smolny and talked with Putin on a wide range of issues. What did the expert Medvedev have to do during this period? Another quote from the memoirs of Dmitry Anatolyevich at the beginning of 2008. During this period, he had to communicate with Putin primarily on those matters that the Committee on Foreign Relations dealt with. These were legal issues, foreign economic issues, sometimes I went on business trips. By the way, they were very interesting for me. That was the first time I visited a number of large states and tried my hand at solving practical legal problems. It was all very interesting. From the words of Medvedev, it unequivocally follows that the work in the mayor's office exclusively from a professional point of view, he was extremely fascinated. Then it is not clear why this interest disappeared in the fall of 1991. Moreover, he disappeared so much that Dmitry Anatolyevich preferred to go into the category of freelance advisors to Putin's FAC. Let us remind you once again, from October-November 1991, Dmitry Anatolyevich preferred to almost completely immerse himself in science, because he had the feeling that he had completely exhausted himself as an expert consultant for the mayor's office of the northern capital. That, however, did not prevent him from performing the functions of an expert under the Putin Committee with the same energy, but already on a freelance basis. What's the matter here? Of course, in all these strange, at first glance, reservations and omissions, the desire to build some cover legend is clearly visible. What is this about? 2 important points must be taken into account. When in 2000, in the interview book, From the First Person, Putin recalls his acquaintance and work with Medvedev in 1990 to 1996, he speaks of this period in a rather streamlined way. It is clear why Vladimir Putin, who became president of the Russian Federation, had just dragged Dmitry Medvedev to Moscow, and he had rather big plans for the career of his former freelance expert. It was important not to ignite a promising shot with any mention of his involvement in the period of an extremely unpleasant half-year, interest in which, when Putin became Yeltsin's successor, erupted in the Russian media with renewed vigor. Putin himself said that, having invited Medvedev to the capital, he wanted to offer him to head the Federal Securities Commission. He is also a specialist in the securities market, Vladimir Vladimirovich added in 2000. At the end of 2007, beginning of 2008, the situation was radically different. Medvedev was already the main contender for the post of President of Russia. And this meant only one thing: there should be no dark spots in his biography. Therefore, Medvedev himself, in conversations with Nikolai and Marina Svanidze, neatly, but quite clearly, bypasses the unpleasant 6 months, making it clear to the thoughtful reader of the bestseller called Medvedev that already since the fall of 1991, he seemed to have been in no way involved in the work of the St. Petersburg. It is clear why. That period was marked by a grandiose scandal, in the epicenter of which, in addition to Anatoly Sobchak, was the chairman of the Committee for External Relations of the mayor's office of the then city of Leningrad, Vladimir Putin. This, of course, is about a large-scale scam associated with barter supplies of food from abroad for Leningrad in exchange for raw materials from state reserves. The monetary equivalent of this scam is still striking in its scope. But more about this in the second chapter of the book, Cleansing of Witnesses. The transformation of Russia from a world superpower into a poor country is one of the most curious events in the history of mankind. This crash happened in peacetime in just a few years. In terms of pace and scale, this collapse has no precedent in world history, wrote American journalist Paul Klebnikov, who was later shot dead in Moscow, in his book. P. Klebnikov. The Godfather of the Kremlin, Boris Berezovsky, or History of the Plundering of Russia. Moscow, 2000. As Yevgeny Stridjan, a Russian researcher in the history of domestic special services, correctly noted, two opposite versions are basically put forward to explain this mystery of the 20th century. One of them is based on the belief that the collapse of the Soviet system was inevitable due to a number of objective reasons, and the involvement of certain persons in it is only an accident in the general pattern. Supporters of the second version believe that the collapse of the Soviet Union occurred as a result of a random combination of circumstances of an exclusively subjective nature, which detonated under the influence of external forces. As you can see, both versions do not completely exclude the presence of hostile actions of interested parties, which, from a conspiracy point of view, is interpreted as a conspiracy. The difference lies only in the extent to which the conspirators, or agents of influence of foreign powers, were able to influence the final result. From our point of view, their role was much more significant than is commonly believed. Since this topic is worthy of a separate study, now we will only briefly outline the main stages in the implementation of an operation of unprecedented scale and political consequences, brilliantly carried out by the U.S. intelligence services. First stage, recruitment and subsequent long-term career cultivation of their agents, primarily in the ideological structures of the state apparatus and the KGB of the USSR, the main stronghold of the Soviet state system. Intelligence professionals are well aware of such a tactic as initiating the failure of their less significant agents in order to move up the ranks of a valuable mole, which is credited as successful operations. The higher the mole rose in the KGB structure, the more the price of the next career step increased. With regard to counterintelligence officer Oleg Kalugin, this task on the part of the CIA was simplified by the fact that they had to sacrifice, basically, not regular American intelligence officers, but Soviet ones, from among defectors and so-called double agents, whom the young general figured out with grace and brilliance. Repeatedly a similar idea was expressed in the media and in relation to the former chairman of the KGB of the USSR Vladimir Kryukov, whose role in the well-known events associated with the collapse of the Soviet state, it is difficult to overestimate. Without going into details, we simply recommend that those interested in this topic watch the wonderful American film, False Temptation, 2006, again. In this spy drama, the protagonist, Edward Wilson, is, in fact, a reverse prototype of KGB General Kalugin, and not only because of the external resemblance of the actor Matt Damon to Oleg Danilovich in his younger years. Second phase, the cultivation of a fifth column within the country from among the Soviet intellectuals who secretly cooperate with the state security agencies and are capable of active political action. In their mass, they must have such personal qualities that could allow them to be manipulated for a long time in a long leash mode. Ms. Gorbachev to glasnost, acceleration, and democratization, fixed in a directive way by the country's top leadership. At the same time, the work of the 5th Directorate of the KGB of the USSR intensified, which launched a large-scale algorithm of political activity, calculated by U.V. Andropov. Carrying out an external cover for the actions of his subordinates, the chairman of the KGB of the USSR V.A. Kryukov entrusted the functions of the chief coordinator of the Andropov scheme to General F.D. Bobkov, who directly directed the efforts of such curators in the field as O.D. Kalugin. The essence of the algorithm put into action was to strictly neutralize the political activity of such uncontrollable dissidents striving for the ideals of democracy as Novodvorskaya and her similar, and at the level of the highest level of the officers of the territorial departments, on the contrary, to encourage such figures as Sobchak and his ilk to display public political activity. The division of the newly minted Democrats into two categories, tame and wild, made it possible in the future to build very effective schemes of political manipulation, which is successfully used to this day, systemic and extra-systemic opposition. All sorts of clubs of voters and other forms of concentration of protest moods began to be created, political discussions and rallies were held. The third stage. A staging of an attempted coup d'état by the reactionary forces, which ends in a shameful failure due to the consolidation of the democratic forces. The formal institutions of power of the Soviet state, unable to resist the forces of reaction, lose their legitimacy in the eyes of the people, and all the levers of state administration pass into the hands of Democrats from the category of tame. The so-called August Putsch of 1991 was the last brilliant special operation carried out by the chairman of the KGB of the USSR, General of the Army Vladimir Kryukov, who, having stoically endured a 17-month imprisonment in Matrosskaya Tishina, retired and began to write memoirs in order to have time to legend his participation in the collapse of the Soviet Union. 4 books were published during his lifetime. His former deputy, who headed the 5th Directorate of the KGB of the USSR, General of the Army Philip Bobkov, who left the office a few months before the State Emergency Committee, formed a private mini-KGB for the oligarch Vladimir Guzinsky, and then, like Kryukov, sat down for memoirs. 2 books have already been published. Major General of the KGB Oleg Kalugin has lived in the United States since 1995, gives public lectures and also writes memoirs. In 2003, he received American citizenship. Back in early 2000, Kalugin's former colleague at the Leningrad KGB, Vladimir Putin, who at that time was acting president of the Russian Federation, called the general a traitor. In 2002, according to the verdict in absentia of the Moscow City Court, Oleg Kalugin was deprived of the military rank of Major General and all state awards of the USSR, as well as a personal pension. The Moscow City Court found Kalugin guilty of high treason and sentenced him to 15 years in prison in a strict regime colony. Apparently, such an intelligent person as Oleg Kalugin managed to protect himself with a solid compromising evidence on Vladimir Putin in his inner circle, so nothing threatens his life while the reputation of a national leader is at stake. In addition, it is carefully guarded by American intelligence services, whom Kalugin himself skillfully taught precautions. Anatoly Sobchak and his former assistant, Yuri Shutov, were much less fortunate. However, about the mysterious death of Sobchak, in the next chapter. But as for Yuri Titovich, as mentioned above, not only the murder of the vice-governor of St. Petersburg, Mikhail Manovich, but also a number of other high-profile crimes were hung up on him. In February 1999, when Putin headed the Russian FSB, Yuri Shutov was arrested. For 2.5 years he was in Kresty while the investigation was ongoing, and another 4.5 years while his case was being considered by the court. While he was in prison, he won the elections to the State Duma, but Yuri Shutov did not receive a deputy mandate, as well as freedom. In November 1999, when Putin already held the post of chairman of the government of the Russian Federation, Yuri Shutov, after the announcement of the verdict of not guilty, was released in the courtroom and immediately captured by SOBR fighters, who escorted him back to prison. On February 17, 2006, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. According to Yuri Shutov himself, all his fault lies in an uncompromising struggle against the thieves who plundered our motherland and robbed our people. What happened was what should have happened, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, carried out in the interests of the United States by the top of the KGB. Everything the levers of state administration ended up in the hands of those security officers who, at the grassroots level, manipulated the tame Democrats and prepared themselves for the new times. The times of managed democracy allowed them not only to distribute national property in their own interests and taste all the delights of bourgeois life, but also to maintain total control over society. Everything happened exactly as it was envisaged by Memorandum 20/1 of the U.S. National Security Council of August 18, 1948, on the next anniversary of which a performance called GKCHP was played. After that, the Moors, who had done their job, retired. And unnecessarily problematic witnesses, who observed from the inside the whole kitchen of national betrayal, were simply cleaned up. Chapter 2. Mutual Responsibility. Criticizing the leaders of the non-systemic opposition, such as Mikhail Kazyanov, Boris Nemtsov or Vladimir Rizhkov, Prime Minister Vladimir Putin directly points out that the current fighters against the political regime want only one thing: money and power. They say, pretty much hurled in the 90s, and now they are striving to return everything to the previous way, so that, as before, it was possible to plunder Russia. At the same time, Vladimir Vladimirovich, in his indignation, is trying to look so sincere that it seems as if he himself was born only in 2000 to the sound of the Kremlin chimes, and immediately, the president of the Russian Federation, and everything that happened in the country, before him, has nothing to do with him. Account is irrelevant. But is it? Group Sally against Putin and Sobchak. The main stage of the scandal with the supply of food to the city on the Neva by barter fell on the beginning of 1992. Formally, Dmitry Medvedev had nothing to do with this case. As we recall, by the fall of 1991, Dmitry Anatolyevich had the feeling that he had exhausted himself as an expert lawyer working in the field of municipal government, and, moreover, it began to seem to him that he should take up science and practical jurisprudence, that is, return to teaching at Leningrad State University. Well, the Foreign Relations Committee headed by Vladimir Putin, he gave a little bit of advice on legal and foreign economic issues, being one of the PIC's freelance experts. But was it really like that? I think not. In reality, events developed in a completely different scenario. The federal and international media began talking about the case of the Sally Group against Putin and Sobchak from January 2000, from the moment when the main character of the St. Petersburg scandal of the early 1990s was nominated as Boris Yeltsin's successor to the post of President of Russia. About the nuances and details of this confrontation today, one can easily find a lot of materials on the internet, in print media, as well as in books published to date. In order to understand exactly how Putin and Medvedev found themselves in such close contact with each other during the license scandal, let us briefly recall the chronicle of the development of events in 1991 to 1992. By the summer of 1991, the situation with the supply of food to the shops of the northern capital began to take on a threatening character. In this regard, Leningrad did not particularly stand out among other Russian cities. A similar critical situation with food was observed throughout the country, but the city on the Neva had its own specifics. After the August Putsch of 1991, President Boris Yeltsin and the Russian government hesitated to initiate economic reforms, while the former Soviet Baltic republics let down prices. As a natural result, a frantic export to Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania began of the remnants of food, which was sold in Leningrad at retail prices set by the state. This led to the fact that in October 1991 the session of the Leningrad City Council decided to introduce ration cards in the city. Investigative journalist Vladimir Ivanidze in his article, Saving Lieutenant Colonel Putin, in early 2010 described the events of those years in this way. In May 1991, Leningrad City Council Deputy Marina Sali, together with her colleagues, traveled to Germany, where a group of Leningrad parliamentarians managed to negotiate with several German firms on the supply of cheap food. The Germans were ready to supply food according to the barter scheme, in exchange for the counter-export of raw materials. The supply of raw materials required the allocation of export quotas by the government of the RSFSR. Marina Sali, who headed the Commission on Food in the Len Soviet, already in September 1991 demanded from the mayor's office. Recall that Anatoly Sobchak was elected mayor of the city on June 12 of the same year, to break through in the federal government the allocation of export quotas for the export of raw materials, in order to so that food supplies from abroad can be carried out according to the barter scheme. In response to repeated appeals from deputies, the mayor's office actually kept deathly silence until the end of December 1991. By the first days of January 1992, the deputies became aware that the government of the RSFSR allocated export quotas to St. Petersburg in early December. And it seems that raw materials in exchange for food have already begun to go abroad. Moreover, the Committee for External Relations of the mayor's office, headed by Vladimir Putin, is in charge of this entire process. But for some reason, the deputies were not provided with any information about these operations. On January 10, 1992, at the 13th session of the Leningrad City Council, the deputies decided to create a commission that would clarify the situation in detail. This deputy group was headed by Marina Sali. Yuri Gladkov became the deputy. The work of the group was greatly assisted by the chairman of the Leningrad City Council, Alexander Belayev. One of the first initiatives of the Solier group was the call on the carpet to the Len Soviet of Vladimir Putin himself. The deputies of the Len Soviet heard the chairman of the Committee on External Relations of the mayor's office at a special closed meeting on January 14, 1992. Vladimir Putin presented the parliamentarians with just a small reference, the entire volume of which fit on 2 pages. But the figures given in it were extremely curious. Vladimir Putin referred to Order of the Government of the Russian Federation No. G. 5-00931 dated January 9, 1992, according to which, in order to provide St. Petersburg with food and conduct barter operations, the city was allocated from state reserves. 750,000 cubic meters of timber and timber was produced by the entire Leningrad region per year, 150,000 tons of oil products, 30,000 tons of ferrous scrap, 120,000 tons of cotton fiber, 1,000 tons of ammonia, 20,000 tons of cement, 1,000 tons of copper, 1,000 tons of aluminum, 14 tons of rare earth metals, tantalum, niobium, cerium, zirconium, yttrium, scandium, ytterbium, etc. Quite quickly, very serious discrepancies were revealed between the data presented by Vladimir Putin in the direction of underestimating the volume of deliveries compared to real contracts and licenses already concluded and issued by Putin's FAC. Discrepancies were also found in the prices of raw materials exported abroad. When the Solier Group tried to get additional documents from Putin, they constantly ran into a refusal from the chairman of the Committee on Foreign Relations of the mayor's office. Vladimir Vladimirovich justified the impossibility of providing the materials necessary for the deputies by the need to observe commercial secrets. The situation turned out to be paradoxical. Raw materials for export in exchange for food according to quotas determined by the government of the RSFSR were allocated by state-owned enterprises, but through which companies and under what conditions it was sent abroad, was the commercial secret of Putin and Sobchak. However, the Solier Group, despite the resistance of Vladimir Vladimirovich and Anatoly Alexandrovich, quickly revealed the true extent of the food scam of the St. Petersburg City Hall. According to the very conservative estimates of the deputy group of Marina Solier, as a result of the price difference alone for food supplied to St. Petersburg, the city should have lost $11.5 million. As for example, rare earth metals exported abroad, their prices were underestimated by 7 to 20 times, and for some positions, in particular, scandium, by 2,000 times. In order not to delve into unnecessary details, we will give 2 very eloquent quotes from the already mentioned article by Vladimir Ivanits, Saving Lieutenant Colonel Putin. Quote 1, Rare earth metals under Putin's licenses were supposed to be exported by the Zhikop joint venture, established in St. Petersburg on September 17, 1991, according to the database of the Registration Chamber of St. Petersburg, with an authorized capital of 100,000 rubles. 1/3 belonged to Mr. Peter Bachmann from Germany. Another 55% went to the small enterprise, Kopris, also known as Kipris, the director and co-owner of which was a certain Gennady Mamedov. Another founder was NTPO Bori, which created in one spring day a whole network of companies for printing books and providing health services. Very useful for exporting rare earths. To the text of his speech to the deputies of the Leningrad City Council on January 14, 1992, Vladimir Putin added a table of the volumes of exported raw materials and prices for each of the firms that received a license for export operations from Putin's KVS. In this regard, the second quote from Vladimir Ivanid's article, according to this table, the Moscow company Intercom Center, whose head, Grigory Myroshnik, was convicted twice, in exchange for 150,000 tons of oil products, was supposed to supply Petersburg in the first quarter of 1992 with 100,000 tons of meat, sugar and potatoes. However, in the agreement with Intercom Center, which Putin did not show to the deputies, there were completely different volumes. According to the contract, in the same quarter of 1992, Intercom Center was supposed to supply frozen meat, 300,000 tons, sugar, 300,000 tons and potatoes, 300,000 tons. Everything is very large. But the problem is that these were completely impossible conditions. To understand these volumes, it is enough to say that even the whole of Moscow would need 3 to 4 months to eat 300,000 tons of meat. In addition, the real price of frozen meat, at the beginning of 1992, could only be in the range of $1,000 to $2,000 per ton. This means that Intercom Center had to pay at least $300 million in the West for meat alone, not counting sugar and potatoes. And this is in exchange for 150,000 tons of oil products, which then cost about $30 million. On March 13, 2000, Novaya Gazeta published an article by Oleg Lury, Sausage for St. Petersburg. How Putin tried to save his city from starvation, the author of which, referring to the documents of the deputy group of Marina Sali in the materials collected by that time by Vladimir Ivanids, noted a number of the most obvious, conspicuous violations. Most of the agreements between the Committee on Foreign Relations St. Petersburg City Hall, headed by V.V. Putin, and intermediary firms were signed without dates, many were not sealed, with signatures and seals, some documents lack attachments, but there are erasures, corrections, and even ordinary mathematical errors. A number of contracts are drawn up in Finnish, and there is no Russian translation. In addition, licenses often do not have registration numbers, the name of the manufacturer of the goods, the buyer's data, and no information is provided about the quota used for the sale of raw materials. The above facts, according to the Deputy Commission, make illegal most of the contracts and licenses. The very pricing in these contracts is also very mysterious. So, for the same lumber in contract number 4, the price is $110 per ton, and in contract number 9, the price is $140. Scrap of ferrous metals is estimated in contract number 6 at $50 per ton, and its real price in Czechoslovakia, where raw materials were supplied, is at least $410 per ton. In contracts number 3, 5, 7, 9, sugar is valued at $280 per ton, and its actual price at that time did not exceed $200. In addition, members of the deputy group led by Marina Solier found out that almost all contracts for the supply of food from abroad were entrusted to clearly front companies, that is, one-day firms, and the schemes for the supply of food in exchange for raw materials were not so, barter. The commission of some of the intermediary firms reached 25 and even 50% of the total amount of the transaction. In March 2000, in a report for the Glasnost Public Foundation, the text was called V. Putin, the president of the corrupt oligarchy. Marina Sali noticed that the total amount of commission payments provided for by 12 contracts between the PIC and intermediary firms exceeded the total complexity amounting to $34 million. Which on average accounted for 37% of the total price of these contracts. It also became known that firms authorized, according to the allocated quotas, to sell raw materials from state reserves abroad, were issued licenses by the Committee on Foreign Relations of the Mayor's Office, which the KVS, according to the legislation in force at that time, could not do categorically. On December 31, 1991, the government of the Russian Federation issued Decree No. 90, which was called, on licensing and quotas for the export and import of goods, works, services, on the territory of the Russian Federation in 1992. According to this decree, the issuance, in particular, of export licenses was exclusively within the competence of the Ministry of Foreign Economic Relations of the Russian Federation, MFR. Until 1992, the ministry had the status of a committee. In order to carry out export-import operations, the MVC, in turn, had special commissioners in the country's regions, who were also endowed with the right to license. Anatoly Pakhomov was the authorized representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the Northwest region of the Russian Federation at that time. Thus, the Committee for Foreign Economic Relations of the St. Petersburg City Hall, headed by Vladimir Putin, had no right to issue licenses for the export of raw materials. However, the FAC issued these licenses. In the course of the work of the deputy group headed by Marina Solier, it also became clear that the issuance of licenses was to be carried out only and exclusively on the basis of the results of auctions and tenders, which, of course, the City Hall's Foreign Relations Committee headed by Vladimir Putin did not conduct. Later, in 2000, Vladimir Putin himself in his book, in the first person, stated the exact opposite: we had no right to issue licenses. That's the whole point. The licenses were given by subdivisions of the Ministry of Foreign Economic Relations. This is a federal structure that had nothing to do with the city administration, chapter, Democrat, subchapter, he dried up in the sense of the soul. And here is what Vladimir Putin wrote on January 14, 1992, in the certificate, on the state of affairs in issuing licenses to provide the city with food, presented to the deputies of the Leningrad City Council and already mentioned earlier, which, among other things, was provided to the deputy group of Marina Sali. The final paragraph of this reference read, as of January 13, 92, the Committee for External Relations of the St. Petersburg Mayor's Office issued licenses, the list and volumes of which are given in the table. Chairman of the Committee for Foreign Relations V. Putin. Signature. You don't have to be a jack of all trades to understand that in one of the two quotes above, Vladimir Putin is lying. Based on what was said earlier, it is clear in which case the national leader is lying. The final outcome of the events in the versions of the warring parties was frankly alternative. According to Vladimir Putin's memoirs, in the first person, chapter, Democrat, subheading, he dried up in the sense of the soul, some firms did not fulfill the main condition of the contract, they did not import products from abroad or did not deliver them in full. According to the memoirs of Marina Solier, a different picture emerged. Since contracts were concluded and licenses were actually issued to front companies, one-day firms, there is nothing surprising in the fact that food in exchange for raw materials in the first quarter of 1992 was never delivered to St. Petersburg. That is, nothing was delivered at all. The amount of economic damage caused then was called different in different years. In a report prepared in March 2000 for the public foundation Glasnost, Marina Sali wrote, V. Putin stole from his citizens the only opportunity to get food through barter transactions. V. Putin deprived his fellow citizens not only of food, but also of at least $100 million. In reality, the amount was much more significant. The government of the Russian Federation allocated quotas for resources, the total cost of which was about $1 billion. It is known for sure that 997 tons of special pure A5 aluminum worth more than $717 million evaporated. Agreements and licenses for this type of resources were not presented to the deputy group. It is probably because of this astronomical figure, $717 million, that both V. Putin and P. Avin shudder only at the mention of such words as 1992, barter, metals. In the same way, 20,000 tons of cement disappeared to no one knows where. There was also, unknown fate, 100,000 tons of cotton worth $120 million, etc., etc. These are the facts. At the origins of legal nihilism. On January 22, 2008, Dmitry Medvedev, already as an official candidate for the president of Russia, took part in a large-scale event called the Two Civil Forum, which took place in Moscow. On this day, as reported, in particular, by the newspaper Trud, in the issue of January 23, 2008, Dmitry Anatolyevich for the first time uttered his famous thesis about the neglect of the norms of the current legislation by Russians. The candidate for the president of Russia then, among other things, said, "Russia is a country of legal nihilism. No European country can boast of such a level of disregard for the law." There are good reasons to believe that Dmitry Anatolyevich knew perfectly well what he was talking about. The food scam of 1991 to 1992 was certainly not something unique to Russia during the period of primitive capital accumulation. But in it, as in a drop of water, those tendencies are clearly visible, which then received rapid growth and further, creative development, in our country. In the food scam, we see the origins of the very legal nihilism, the presence of which on a nationwide scale in 16 years will be sharply noticed by lawyer Dmitry Medvedev. On the example of the St. Petersburg food scam, now, after 20 years, it is very clear that the foundation of the notorious legal nihilism in Russia was laid, to put it mildly, not least by those who, on duty, were obliged to guard the letter and spirit of the law, officials of the municipal and state levels, employees of law enforcement and supervisory authorities. Did the participants in the St. Petersburg barter food scam then, in 1991 to 1992, understand how, from the point of view of criminal law, what they were doing was classified? Of course. This is once again evidenced by the documents of a group of deputies of the Leningrad City Council headed by Marina Saley. Realizing that the commercial secret could not be kept, on December 4, 1991, the chairman of the Committee for Foreign Relations of the Mayor's Office of St. Petersburg, Vladimir Putin, sent a letter to the chairman of the Committee for Foreign Economic Relations of the RSFSR, Pyotr Avin. It is possible that this letter was drawn up retroactively, when the deputies of the Len Soviet became closely interested in the licensed activities of the FAC. In order to establish operational control over sales for the export of raw materials and materials, I ask you to grant the right to dispose of quotas and issue export licenses in accordance with them to the Committee for External Relations of the St. Petersburg City Hall. Chairman of the Committee V.V. Putin. Signature. This letter, a copy of which can be found in print and online sources, raises many questions. It was this document that guided the FAC, headed by Vladimir Putin, issuing licenses for the export of raw materials worth many, many millions of dollars. You don't need to have deep knowledge of the law to understand how legally insignificant all these pieces of paper were. The poorly readable resolution on this letter reads, to allow the issuance of quotas and licenses for the specified nomenclature of facts in the specified quantities to the St. Petersburg Mayor's Office until November 15, 91. It can be seen that in the figure denoting the year, 91, the unit is corrected for 2. Under the permission is someone's signature, it seems to be Peter Avin. On the right is the stamp, agreed. Its dating raises big questions. Formally, according to the same Putin, the date should be read like this, January 9, 1992. But the number denoting the day of the month is more like a 5 than a 9. The ordinal number of the month also raises questions. Is it a 2, written in the Roman numeral 2, or is it really the designation of November, made by 2 Arabic units? Above the date of this visa is someone's signature. It seems to be Yegor Gaidar's autograph. True, if we compare this autograph with Gaidar's signature on a letter addressed by Yegor Timirovich in January of the same year, 1992, to the chairman of the Customs Committee of the Russian Federation Kruglov, about this letter, a little later, it is easy to conclude, one of these autographs E.T. Gaidar clearly does not belong. Below we see another autograph, signature of Gaidar E.T. I confirm, under which there is a signature with a problematic readable transcript without indicating the date. All this is crowned by a seal, in the center of which we see the inscription, Personnel Department No. 2, and along the circumference of the seal it says, Administration of the President of the RSFSR. Permission to carry out foreign economic activity was then given only by the Committee for Foreign Economic Relations of the government of the RSFSR. Therefore, under the permission of the Mayor's Office of St. Petersburg to dispose of quotas and issue licenses for the export of raw materials abroad, the signature of the chairman of the KVES Petr Avin had to be signed. Suppose this permission had to be endorsed by the deputy chairman of the government of the RSFSR Yegor Gaidar, or by the head of the Russian government himself, which from November 6, 1991 to June 15, 1992, simultaneously acting president of the RSFSR, was led by Boris Yeltsin. But, as you might guess, this, again, had to be done in writing on the official letterhead of either the KVES or the government of the RSFSR. Why is Yegor Gaidar's signature certified by an employee of the administration of the president of the RSFSR? Why does this seal belong to the personnel department of the AP? And what does the administration of the president of the RSFSR have to do with it, if all issues related to foreign economic activity at that time belonged exclusively to the sphere of competence of the Russian government? But even if we recognize it as a fact that Avin's permission resolution actually stands on Putin's petition and this permission was agreed with Gaidar, many questions still remain. So let's assume that Putin's petition actually bears Gaidar's signature. Let's say it is dated January 9, 1992. Why, then, in this case, to sign contracts with contractors for the export of raw materials and issue licenses to them, the KVS headed by Putin began even before this date, from the end of December 1991. For example, a one-time license issued by CJSC Fivker to export 50,000 cubic meters of timber to neighboring Finland was personally signed by Putin on December 26, 1991. Why, on what basis? Vladimir Stepanov, head of the St. Petersburg Customs, had the same reasonable questions, who did not perceive the papers provided by the St. Petersburg City Hall as permission from the government of the RSFSR to issue licenses for export operations to the FAC of the City Hall. V.G. Stepanov then, in January 1992, addressed the chairman of the Customs Committee of the RSFSR A.A. Kruglov with a request to confirm the powers of Putin's FAC. Kruglov, in turn, addresses these questions to the deputy chairman of the Russian government E. Gaidar. Gaidar, no later than January 14, 1992, unequivocally answers Kruglov in the vein that the government of the Russian Federation did not grant the right to issue licenses to any other state bodies or organizations, and asks the head of the Customs Committee to give instruction not to let cargo under licenses. Gaidar's directive immediately descends along the customs vertical. The instruction of the chairman of the Customs Committee of Russia in St. Petersburg was carried out in full. As soon as the ban on the export of raw materials came into effect, on January 27, 1992, Vladimir Putin sent an alarming message to the head of the Saint on January 30, 1992, Vladimir Putin receives a response from Customs, which, in particular, lists the violations noticed by customs officers, and also contains a request addressed to Chairman of the FAC Putin to consider the economic feasibility of transactions made by the Foreign Relations Committee of the St. Petersburg Mayor's Office. Representatives of federal structures became interested in the lawlessness that was taking place in St. Petersburg then. In early February 1992, Anatoly Pakhomov, authorized representative of the Ministry of Foreign Economic Relations for the Northwest region, sent a letter to the head of the ministry, Petr Avin, in which he explained to the chief the essence of violations with licenses. Pakhomov, in particular, emphasized that the allocated quotas were not confirmed, as required by the laws and regulations of the government of the Russian Federation, in the Ministry of Economy and Finance. In addition, Pakhomov, having briefly analyzed only a few contracts and licenses concluded and issued by the FAC headed by Putin, concluded that these pieces of paper cannot be recognized as legally significant documents, because during their preparation, all the rules for compiling such documents were violated. In February 2010, Marina Saley, who now lives in a village in the Pskov region, gave an extensive interview to a Radio Liberty correspondent. Marina Yevgenievna, in particular, told the following about the fraud with the prices of raw materials exported abroad, and about the reaction that followed to the appeals of the Lentsevet deputies. As for scandium, the price of 72.6 is indicated in the contract Deutschmarks. In reality, the price of the cheapest scandium is $2,000 per kilogram. This is 40 times higher than the price specified in the contract. And in 1992, when the metal was exported, the price of scandium metal powder was $372,000 per kilogram. Hundreds of times higher. Scandium was taken out 7 kilograms. So multiply. In general, under these contracts it was about millions, about tens of millions of dollars of profit. When Jaeger Gaidar realized that something incredible was happening in St. Petersburg with this barter, he reacted. And he realized it because I informed Fyodor Shkrednev, at that time the acting representative of the President of the Russian Federation in St. Petersburg, Alexander Belayev, then chairman of the Leningrad City Council, helped me a lot in this. We also sent all our materials to Jaeger Gaidar. Marina Solier's appeal to the representative of the President of the Russian Federation in St. Petersburg also did not remain without consequences. In February 1992, Fyodor Shkrednev sent a letter to Anatoly Pakhomov, authorized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the Northwestern region, in which he asked him not to issue licenses according to quotas allocated to the Committee for External Relations of the City Hall. Shkrednev explained his request by the fact that he never received a response to all his requests to the FAC for issued licenses. In fact, it was the end. The food scam on this could well have ended in very big troubles for the mayor of St. Petersburg, Anatoly Sobchak. And his subordinate, Vladimir Putin, such a final threatened with a real initiation of a criminal case. Already at the end of January 1992, for both Sobchak and Putin, it became quite obvious what conclusions a group of Leningrad City Council deputies led by Marina Solier would come to. The situation had to be saved at any cost, and legal nihilism triumphed. Even then, frankly illegal acts were preferred to be denoted by a more politically correct wording, political expediency. What do we mean? Here is how events developed further. The mayor of St. Petersburg, Anatoly Sobchak, addresses the Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian Federation Jaeger Gaidar directly. In his letter, dated January 27, 1992, he floridly asks to confirm the right of the St. Petersburg City Hall to issue licenses and, moreover, asks to exempt intermediary firms engaged in export operations from the mandatory sale of a part of foreign exchange earnings to the state. Interestingly, in this letter, Anatoly Sobchak refers to some kind of permission from Jaeger Gaidar, which gives the St. Petersburg mayor's office the right to issue export licenses. This permission, as follows from Sobchak's letter, it turns out, was issued by Deputy Prime Minister Gaidar on December 5, 1991. Motivating the need to make decisions that are very ambiguous from the point of view of the legislation of the Russian Federation in force at that time, Anatoly Sobchak put forward frankly speculative theses from the category of so-called political expediency. Say, if you do not legitimize what the mayor's office of St. Petersburg has already managed to do, the population will be left without food, and the mayor's office and the regional administration, as local authorities, will lose credibility among the population. In this regard, a natural question arises. Were the head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Pyotr Avin and Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian Federation Jaeger Gaidar aware of the scam unfolding in St. Petersburg? It is possible to formulate this question more strictly. Were Avin and Gaidar in a share with Sobchak, Putin and those who stood behind them, or not? Alas, but most likely, yes. How else can one explain the fact that Jaeger Gaidar so diligently avoided putting his autograph on documents that gave Sobchak and Putin the opportunity to drive raw materials abroad en masse without supplying a kilogram of food to St. Petersburg in return? So, the letter of Anatoly Sobchak, addressed to Jaeger Gaidar, was followed by a response from Peter Avin. On Sobchak's appeal, there are 2 visas signed by the head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. The first of them reads, "I support without changing quotas and export duties." The second visa clarifies, according to export duties, I agree with the agreements concluded between the mayor's office and suppliers until January 15, 92. VV Putin under personal responsibility, saving not only his subordinate, but also, of course, himself, Anatoly Sobchak in the same period of time, tentatively in February-March 1992, broke through the signing of a curious document, the Protocol on Cooperation between the City Hall of St. Petersburg and the Ministry of Foreign Economic Relations RF. The main focus of this cooperation was to cover up, albeit after the fact, the egregious violations that the mayor's office had already committed in issuing export licenses and concluding contracts for the supply of food in exchange for the export of raw materials. To do this, as defined in paragraph 1 of the Protocol, General Provisions, the Minfer separates the Minfer branch for St. Vladimir Putin. At the same time, the branch of the authorized Minfer of Russia in St. Petersburg becomes a body of dual subordination. On issues of foreign economic activity, it reports directly to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, but on all other issues, to the mayor's office. And one more thing, the head of this very body of dual subordination is appointed by the mayor of St. Petersburg in agreement with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Soon, on March 23, 1992, the St. Petersburg City Council of People's Deputies heard the report of the Working Deputy Group on the issue of quotas and licensing of exports and imports of goods on the territory of St. Petersburg. The report was signed by the People's Deputy of the RSFSR and the St. Petersburg City Council M.E. Saley and her deputy, People's Deputy of the St. Petersburg City Council U.P. Gladkov. The eighth and final section of this report contained 5 absolutely killer points, both for Putin and for Sobchak himself. 8.1. Transfer the materials prepared by the Working Deputy Group to the City Prosecutor's Office. 8.2. Remove Putin VV. Anikin AG, Putin's deputy for the FAC, also had the right to sign when issuing licenses, from their positions. 8.3. When appointing a new head of the PIC of the mayor's office, the chairman of the council must coordinate the candidacies with the mayor of the city. 8.4. Withdraw from the PIC of the mayor's office and other committees of the mayor's office the right to conduct commercial activities. 8.5. Further implementation of quotas and licenses should be carried out in strict accordance with the decree of the Government of the Russian Federation of December 31, 1991, as well as in agreement with the Committee on International and Foreign Economic Relations of the City Council. A day later, on March 25, 1992, the Ministry of Foreign Economic Relations of the Russian Federation, signed by Minister Petr Avin, issues Order No. Petersburg and MVS. According to this order, it is prescribed, among other things, to allocate, within 3 days, from the office of the Commissioner of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the Northwestern region of the Russian Federation, a branch for the city of St. The materials of the report of the Deputy Working Group headed by Marina Saley are sent to the Prosecutor's Office of St. Petersburg. The Prosecutor's Office, as Marina Evgenievna recalled, did not answer for a long time, and then an epistle came from this respected body to the Len Soviet, in which it was said that the prosecutor's office was summoning the secretary of the Len Soviet Golyabev on the food case, who had nothing to do with the food scam, nor to the circumstances of the parliamentary investigation. After that, Marina Saley took the materials of the report of her deputy group to the head of the control department of the presidential administration of the Russian Federation, Yuri Boldyrev. Boldyrev's reaction was instantaneous. On March 31, 1992, he sends an official letter addressed to the head of the MVC Petr Avin with the following content: Dear Petr Olegovich, the Control Department of the Administration of the President of the Russian Federation received materials from the deputies of the Working Group of the St. Petersburg City Council of People's Deputies, indicating the possible need to remove VV from the position. In this regard, I ask you not to consider the issue of appointing Putin VV to any positions pending consideration of these materials by the Control Department. Later, in an interview with Radio Liberty, aired on March 9, 2010, Yuri Boldyrev recalled that Pyotr Avin ignored his letter. And the inspection of the activities of the mayor's office of St. Petersburg due to the high workload of the Control Directorate of the Presidential Administration of the Russian Federation was postponed several times, first from March to April, then to May 1992. When the check took place, according to Yuri Boldyrev, quite significant facts were revealed. Sobchak, Putin, and almost all the deputies of the mayor of St. Petersburg were called to the Control Department to give explanations. Moreover, The heads of inspections of the Control Department of the Presidential Administration of the Russian Federation, who previously traveled to St. Petersburg, drew attention to the fact that the leadership of the city mayor's office initially refused in principle to give any explanation for the violations identified. Soon Anatoly Sobchak appointed Vladimir Putin as authorized representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for St. Petersburg. Putin's candidacy, of course, was successfully coordinated in the Ministry of Foreign Economic Relations of the Russian Federation. After a very short time, Vladimir Vladimirovich strengthened his position in the mayor's office, becoming also the deputy mayor of St. Petersburg. Subsequently, Yuri Boldyrev left the post of head of the Control Department of the Administration of the President of the Russian Federation. As well as Anatoly Pakhomov, the post of authorized representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the northwestern region of the Russian Federation. The prosecutor's office did not conduct any investigation based on the materials of the deputy group headed by Marina Solier. For the sake of political expediency, no further progress was given to the case. Yeltsin's social base and the death of Sobchak. Today, recalling the 1990s, the participants in the events of those years and representatives of the younger generation do not get tired of arguing about what this period in the history of Russia was, the Roaring 90s, or the Time of Hopes. Who was Boris Yeltsin, the man who saved Russia from civil war, or a protégé of the Washington Regional Committee who seized power? Who was Anatoly Sobchak, a devout Democrat of the New Wave or a thieving communist shifter? Who was Yegor Gaidar, a brilliant economist or a crooked reformer who robbed the majority of the country's population? The story of the food scam of the St. Petersburg City Hall in 1991 to 1992 in this regard, as mentioned above, is indeed not unique, but very indicative and symptomatic for that time. What exactly? Let us once again give the floor to the highly informed participants in the events of those years. In the above-mentioned interview for Radio Liberty in March 2010, Yuri Boldyrev recalled, "I led the Control Department until the beginning of March 1993. Then the Control Department was abolished and recreated in a new status, a very tragicomic one. Since April 1993, when Alexei Ilyushenko was no longer in charge of the department, a control and supervisory board was placed over the Control Directorate, consisting of just those who were controlled, from governors, ministers, and so on. When I was fired, the universe was not so Peter-centric. The story with the check in St. Petersburg has nothing to do with my dismissal. It was an ordinary check that revealed significant violations, but not radically more serious than in other subjects of the Federation. There were completely standard things related to obtaining the rights to export strategic metals in exchange for food, which was then not supplied. Such facts were then quite typical. It was a mass phenomenon. Then the internal control that worked for the president, aimed at the fact that the authorities should have the full and undisguised truth, simply became unnecessary for Yeltsin. Yeltsin was already preparing for a coup. Let me remind you that there were 3 attempts, in December 1992, in February-March 1993, and then the final one, in September 1993. Yeltsin was looking for a social base and found it just in those who wanted to graze on the allotted lawn and not be afraid of anything. These people achieved that, ultimately, there was no independent control that could impartially check everything and report to the president. But not only Boris Yeltsin was looking for a social base. The rapidly forming social base was also looking for a reliable patron and protector. And from this point of view, the results of the St. Petersburg food scam in 1991 to 1992 look completely natural. Democrat Yeltsin and Democrat Sobchak built a legal, democratic state in which law and law were trampled en masse for the sake of momentary political expediency. On February 19, 2010, the premiere of the documentary film 10 Years Later. Anatoly Sobchak, co-authored by the widow of the former mayor of St. Petersburg, Ludmila Narasova, and director Anatoly Gabnys. Reflecting on the myths that were once again launched into the mass public consciousness by this political blockbuster, Marina Sali noted in February 2010, Sobchak has never been a Democrat. The Len Soviet, of course, is to blame, including myself, that we put him in the kingdom. But what happened next was not expected by anyone. Almost from the first meeting, he began to stomp on us, insulting the deputies in completely unacceptable terms, discrediting them in every possible way. And he had a lot of ways. All the press was in his hands, and he was published willingly. We were also printed, but less often. They weren't allowed on television. And this discrediting of the best city council in Russia, I was then in the Moscow City Council, and I can say that our composition was stronger, I am convinced, led to the discrediting of the legislature in general. Not only in St. Petersburg, but throughout the country. And so we came to our current parliament. Sobchak had a clear goal, to make out of the council. It is not appropriate for an elderly woman, a doctor of sciences, to speak obscene words. But he wanted to make out of the council, The conflict began immediately. He became the master of the city. President Medvedev, in my opinion, said so in the film about Sobchak. Does Medvedev even understand that there should be a separation of legislative, executive, and judicial powers? The dominance of executive power was laid precisely under Sobchak. After all, then the city council became smaller and met less often. And this St. Petersburg style undoubtedly influenced the current government. Marina Saley recalls a very remarkable episode from the activities of the Leningrad City Council in the early 1990s. In early 1992, the deputies of the St. Petersburg City Council of People's Deputies prepared a document entitled Analysis of Regulatory Documents issued by the Mayor and Vice Mayor of St. Petersburg, which included a list of laws that the prominent lawyer Anatoly Sobchak systematically violated, on property, on local self-government, the Code of the RSFSR on administrative offenses, the laws of the USSR on cooperation, on enterprises and entrepreneurial activity, and so on. On January 15, 1992, Marina Saley personally handed this document into the hands of Boris Yeltsin. The result was null. A similar fate befell the next appeal of the Leningrad City Council deputies dated March 30, 1992, then the deputies of the northern capital considered it appropriate to raise the issue of releasing the mayor of St. Petersburg Anatoly Sobchak from his post. Among other things, Sobchak was blamed for the fact that the mayor of the city stubbornly sought to remove the executive power from the control of the representative. The guarantor of the constitution, Boris Yeltsin, did not react to this appeal either. For Sobchak, in the end, the period of his leadership of St. Petersburg did not end with anything good. History has repeatedly proven that revolutions, even military political, even criminal corruption ones, always devour their children. And Sobchak was no exception to this rule. A year after he lost the election of the mayor of St. Petersburg to Vladimir Yakovlev, on October 3, 1997, Anatoly Sobchak was brought by the Prosecutor General's office as a witness in the case of corruption in the authorities of St. Petersburg. In the same year, Anatoly Sobchak was accused of abuses committed by him during his tenure as mayor of the city. On November 7, 1997, Anatoly Sobchak flew to France for treatment at an American hospital located in Paris. Marina Saley in February 2010 claimed that Sobchak's departure was actually a flight. Initially, not without the help of Vladimir Putin, he fled to Finland by plane, from where he then moved to France, allegedly for a heart operation, which looked very strange. On Sobchak's sick heart never complained. In the book, From the First Person, Conversations with Vladimir Putin, chapter, Democrat, subchapter, Sobchak was real. Putin, without saying anything about Sobchak's aching heart, nevertheless mentions that the disgraced ex-mayor was lying in St. Petersburg in the cardiology hospital, from where he was transferred to the Military Medical Academy. After that, some friends, apparently from Finland, sent an ambulance plane for Sobchak, on which he was sent to France. Denying the very fact that the evacuation of Anatoly Sobchak was a well-planned special operation, Vladimir Putin, however, admits that the moment of Sobchak's departure was chosen very well, since it was November 7, when the country began to celebrate. His absence from St. Petersburg was discovered only on the 10th. On September 13, 1998, the Russian Prosecutor General's office opened a criminal case against Anatoly Sobchak under the articles bribe and abuse of official authority. Sobchak lived in Paris until July 12, 1999. He lectured at the Sorbonne and other French universities. On November 10, 1999, the criminal case against Sobchak was terminated due to the lack of corpus delicti. On December 21, 1999, having already returned to Russia, Anatoly Sobchak lost the election to the State Duma of the Russian Federation to the candidate from Yabloko, Petr Shelish, and announced that he had decided to participate in the election of the governor of St. Petersburg. On February 14, 2000, Anatoly Sobchak was appointed a confidant of the candidate for the president of the Russian Federation V.V. Putin and headed the Political Advisory Council of Democratic Parties and Movements of St. Petersburg. After that, Sobchak died quite unexpectedly during a trip to the Kaliningrad region, undertaken by him as part of Putin's election campaign. He died on the night of February 19 to 20, 2000 in the Rus Hotel in Svetlogorsk as a result, as reported in the official conclusion, of an acute heart failure. Anatoly Sobchak was buried on February 24, 2000 in St. Petersburg at the Nikolsky Cemetery of the Alexander Nevsky Lavra. After that, rumors immediately spread throughout the country about the murder of the first mayor of the northern capital, who knew too much. These rumors also featured versions of Sobchak's poisoning with alcohol, as well as the fact that cardiac arrest occurred as a result of taking too large a dose of Viagra. As a result, on May 6, 2000, 2.5 months after the death of A.A. Sobchak, the prosecutor's office of the Kaliningrad region initiated a criminal case on the fact of murder, poisoning. However, the autopsy of Sobchak's body, performed in St. Petersburg, stated the absence of both alcohol and other causes of poisoning. On August 4, 2000, the Kaliningrad prosecutor's office closed the case. Was Anatoly Sobchak worth returning to Russia at all? The question seems to be rhetorical. Finally, here is the last quote from Marina Sali's interview for Radio Liberty, which took place in February 2010, as soon as Boris Nikolaevich handed over the reins of power to Vladimir Vladimirovich. Anatoly Alexandrovich decided that now everything is in order, he is beyond jurisdiction. And under such protection as Vladimir Vladimirovich, he can safely return to Russia. Which he did. And he was absolutely wrong. And he was absolutely wrong. The case ended badly. I think, let's put it this way, I think that it is unlikely that he died a natural death. Because all the circumstances of this death were very strange. And Lyudmila Borisovna, Narasova, the day after his death, herself made such an assumption. True, a day later, everything that was needed was probably well explained to her, and she refused this version. It would be nice, of course, to exhume Sobchak's body, and check what, in fact, was the cause of his death. The finale of the food scam, Avon, Putin and Cherksov. Beginning of 2000. One of the first journalists who tried to understand the details of the story of food barter and the report of the Deputy Working Group of Marina Sali was Vladimir Ivanidze, a columnist for the Vedomosti newspaper. Ivanidze's article, Saving Lieutenant Colonel Putin, was never published in Vedomosti, after which the journalist was forced to leave the editorial office of this newspaper. He got a job in the monthly Top Secret at the invitation of the head of the publishing holding Artyom Borovik, who soon died on March 9, 2000 as a result of a plane crash on a Yak-40 aircraft flying Moscow, Kiev. After a short time, Vladimir Ivanidze was forced to leave the editorial office of Top Secret, and then to leave Russia altogether. In the process of collecting materials for the article, Saving Lieutenant Colonel Putin, Vladimir Ivanidze, a few days before the death of Anatoly Sobchak, met with him in his apartment in St. Petersburg. According to Ivanidze, all Sobchak's answers boiled down to the fact that there was nothing illegal in barter deliveries. When Vladimir Ivanidze tried to draw Anatoly Sobchak's attention to the documents of Marina Sali's Deputy Working Group and asked for some comment on them, Anatoly Alexandrovich answered extremely, convincingly, and reasonably, as befits a law professor, "Don't believe this." Vladimir Ivanidze repeatedly tried to interview Yegor Gaidar, but all his attempts were in vain. The attempts of Vladimir Ivanidze to reach Pyotr Avin turned out to be just as unsuccessful. However, in this direction, the journalist was a little more fortunate. In an interview with Radio Liberty on March 11, 2010, Timchenko's trail in the Saley report, Vladimir Ivanidze told the following about Petr Avin's reaction to the investigation of the ST. The question was asked why he ignored Yuri Boldyrev's warning that Putin could be removed from the post of head of the Committee on Foreign Economic Relations, and appointed him as MVC authorized representative for St. Petersburg. The question was not asked by me, but by my ex-wife, Agath Dupark, who, as a foreign journalist. Avin then got worried and answered her, "They didn't find anything there was nothing." Half an hour later, he returned to the topic himself and repeated again, "Nothing was found there." But after all, they didn't find it precisely because of this appointment. It is difficult to say unequivocally how deeply Pyotr Avin was involved in the food scam. However, from the above quote, you can see how much Pyotr Olegovich was nervous when, 8 years later, he was asked a question about the circumstances of the events of the early 1990s. And the last. Was the food scam of 1991 to 1992 carried out by its direct participants solely at their own peril and risk? I think not. There is reason to believe that the food scam was a very large-scale special operation, in which the then Department of the Ministry of Security of the Russian Federation, since 1993, the FSB, played a huge role in St. Petersburg. And that's why, according to Vladimir Putin's version, set out by him in the book, From the First Person. Chapter, Democrat, subheading, he dried up in the sense of the soul. The events of 1991 to 1992 developed according to a completely different pattern than Marina Saley told about it, her colleagues in the Deputy Corps of the Leningrad City Council and journalists. Putin argued in 2000 that the deputies of the Leningrad City Council had nothing to do with agreements on food supplies under the barter scheme. The barter scheme, raw materials in exchange for food, was invented by St. Petersburg businessmen, and the mayor's office had no other options for saturating the market. Therefore, the Committee for External Relations of the St. Petersburg mayor's office agreed with the proposed option. And, they say, everything was legal, licenses were issued by whomever was supposed to, not a gram of rare earth metals was exported. And the scandal about corruption was inspired by some of the deputies of the Lensovet with the aim of influencing Anatoly Sobchak so that he fired the KGB officer, Putin. Plus, some of the deputies themselves wanted to make money on deals for the supply of food to St. Petersburg, but they didn't get anything, so they found an evil KGB officer who interfered, and he had to be expelled. A little further, speaking about the sad results of food supplies instead of raw materials sent for export, Vladimir Putin actually signs for his incompetence as head of the Committee on Foreign Relations of the mayor's office. We should have worked more closely with law enforcement agencies and beat the promises out of these firms with a stick. But it was pointless to sue them, they dissolved immediately, they stopped their activities, exported their goods. In fact, they had nothing to show. Remember that time, then quite often there were some offices, financial pyramids, MMM. We just did not expect this. Chairman of the FAC of the mayor's office, Comrade Putin VV and his deputy Comrade Anikin AG showed complete incompetence, bordering on dishonesty in drawing up contracts, licenses, other documents, unprecedented negligence and irresponsibility in providing documents to the deputy group, which is confirmed by numerous discrepancies in the data in different documents. This is already a quote from paragraph 7.6. Report of the Working Deputy Group headed by Marina Solier dated March 23, 1992. Overlooked. Confused. They didn't expect it. It's a paradox, but a fact. Irreconcilable opponents agreed on the assessment of Vladimir Putin's professional suitability regarding his activities at the head of the FAC of the ST. In the same period, the mayor's office of St. Petersburg came up with another remarkable initiative. It was decided to establish tight control over the city's gambling business in order to replenish the city budget. For what, as Putin himself said, a municipal enterprise was created, which in itself did not own a single casino, but controlled 51% of the shares of the city's gambling establishments. In the book, From the First Person, chapter, Democrat, subchapter, Having Touched the Beautiful, It's Time to Back Off, Putin recalled the following about the control system of the mayor's office over the gambling business of the city on the Neva, representatives of the main controlling organizations were delegated to this enterprise: the FSB, tax police, tax inspection. The calculation was that the state, as a shareholder, would receive dividends from 51% of the shares. It's funny that this was done in contradiction with the law of the Russian Federation on competition and restriction of monopolistic activities in commodity markets, signed on March 22, 1991 by the first deputy chairman of the Supreme Council of the RSFSR R.I. Kosbolatov. And Putin admits in black and white that his position on establishing control over the gambling business in St. Petersburg contradicted this law, making an embarrassed reservation. Then I thought, I don't know whether it's right or not, that gambling is such a field of activity, in which there should be a state monopoly. Note that this was a lawyer speaking. It turns out that Vladimir Putin did not know whether he was doing the right thing by violating the current legislation. If you can't, but really want to, then you can. Another excellent example of legal nihilism, the foundations of which he laid in the new Russia. The outcome of this epic is very easy to predict. The budget of St. Petersburg did not receive a penny from the control over the gambling business. It turns out that the owners of the casino showed only losses and only laughed at the klutzes from the St. Petersburg mayor's office. It was a classic mistake of people who first encountered the market, Vladimir Vladimirovich lamented. Judging by the fact that the scheme turned out to be ineffective and with its help it was not possible to achieve what was planned, it must be admitted that it was not thought through to the end. And although, as already mentioned, both tax officials and FSB agents were delegated to the municipal gambling enterprise, the result turned out to be the same: they overlooked, were confused, did not expect, did not think through to the end. Later, in the 4th chapter of this book, we will return to the topic of the gambling business in Russia in order to understand what lessons Vladimir Putin, who became president of the Russian Federation, learned from his experience in St. Petersburg. Or rather, did he learn any lessons at all? By the way, in his memoirs, chapter, Democrat, subheading, The Flagpole was cut off by an autogenous gun, Vladimir Putin gives a directly opposite example of the work of the same FSB. Recalling the dispersal of the Soviets in October 1993 and comparing how it happened in Moscow and St. Petersburg, Vladimir Putin said the following: "It is important that then there was no longer, as in 1991, a split among law enforcement agencies. The leadership of the FSB department, and it was then headed by Viktor Cherksov, from the very beginning declared their support for the mayor. It carried out a number of measures to detain extremists who staged provocations, were going to blow something up, destabilize the situation. That's where it all ended. That is, when it came to building a managed democracy, the FSB showed excellent results. But as soon as the FSB in St. Petersburg tried to control the business, nothing came of it, everything fell out of hand. Now it remains to find boobies who would believe in this version." One of the key figures in the St. Petersburg FSB at that time was, of course, Viktor Cherksov. It makes sense to take a closer look at this officer. From 1988 to 1992 he was the head of the investigative department of the Leningrad department of the KGB-AFB-MBR. Prior to that, for a number of years, Viktor Vasilievich worked in the 5th Department of the KGB Directorate for Leningrad and the Leningrad region and, as mentioned above, he was remembered for his fight against dissidents. In dissident circles, Viktor Cherksov became famous, in particular, for the fact that, filling out the protocol of interrogation of Rostislav Evdokimov, a member of the People's Labor Union, who eventually received 5 years of strict regime and 3 years of exile, he called the city of Vienna the capital of Switzerland. And Evdokimov himself later, February 15, 2000 in the Segednya newspaper, described the style of work of his former investigator as follows, that is, party laws. At one time, it was Viktor Cherksov who spoke on Leningrad television and showed the viewers an old fax machine seized from me during a search, explaining that it was a super spy device made for me by the secret services of the West. Viktor Cherksov was also remembered for the fact that in 1988 he initiated the last case in the USSR under Article 70 of the Criminal Code of the RSFSR, Anti-Soviet Agitation and Propaganda, against the Leningrad branch of the Democratic Union Party on the fact that it was distributed by members of the party newspaper Free Word. Yuli Rybakov, who was a member of the Democratic Union, later a deputy of the State Duma of the Federal Assembly of the Russian Federation, recalled that arrests did not follow only because the Supreme Soviet of the USSR cancelled Article 70 of the Criminal Code of the RSFSR on time. Later, for example, in December 2004, in an article published in the Komsomolskaya Pravda newspaper, as director of the Federal Drug Control Service, Viktor Cherksov claimed that he, like many of his colleagues, always stood guard over the interests of states, not striving at all costs to break the fate of people for the sake of the ideology that prevailed in the last period of the existence of the USSR, which rapidly evolved to insanity. And he urged to remember self-restraint, the suppression of the spirit of acquisitiveness, curbing the temptations with which the era of underdeveloped and unstable capitalism is filled, because such an approach is the only alternative to repeating the shameful fate of the reborn Soviet nomenclatura. Thoughtful researchers of the life and professional path of Viktor Cherksov believe that his only serious achievement in the field of combating the internal enemy was the Pavlov case, an employee of the Atomic Inspection of the State Maritime Register, who handed over to the special services of Germany and the United States some secret information about Soviet submarines. For his exposure in 1984, Cherksov received the Order of the Red Star. However, Viktor Cherksov did not lose his attention to ideology even later. Already heading the FSB Directorate for Street was acquitted by the court on all counts. In her book, The Catcher in Lies, Valeria Novodvorskaya, referring to the initial detention of Captain Nikitin, described Viktor Cherksov as follows: "It remains to pray for the planned former and current dissident hunter." When in 1992 the case of the food scam came to naught, when all the hype around the investigation of the Saley Group subsided, Viktor Cherksov was appointed head of the Department of the Russian Ministry of Security for St. Petersburg and the Leningrad region. Prior to Cherksov, since 1991, Sergei Stepashin was the head of the Directorate of the Federal Security Agency of the RSFSR for St. Petersburg and the Leningrad region, with the rank of Deputy Director General of the AFB of the RSFSR. After Sergei Vadimovich went to work in Moscow, the head of the investigative department of the Leningrad Directorate, now the MBR of the Russian Federation, Cherksov was the main candidate for the vacant position. The appearance, as Valeria Novodvorskaya noted, of a hunter for dissidents as a candidate for such a high and responsible post, provoked a whole storm of indignation among the deputies of the Leningrad City Council, which caused a new serious scandal. A representative delegation of the city intelligentsia then arrived at the mayor Anatoly Sobchak. He pretended to be extremely amazed and puzzled by the appointment of Cherksov, and promised the walkers to personally discuss this problem with Boris Yeltsin. But in the end, he did nothing. As already mentioned, deputies of the Len Soviet energetically joined the case. As Novaya Gazeta columnist Boris Vishnevsky noted in January 2005, on November 20, 1992, the session of the Len Soviet, by a majority of 117 votes, 27 deputies voted against and 15 deputies abstained, adopted an appeal to Boris Yeltsin demanding to cancel the appointment of a person who participated in the organization of political trials against participants in the democratic movement of the 80s. However, the result of this appeal was quite unexpected. On December 13, 1992, the then head of the Russian Ministry of Security, Viktor Baranikov, stated that the appointment of Viktor Cherksov was agreed with the mayor of St. Petersburg, Anatoly Sobchak. Taking into account the officially recognized interpretation of the personality of Anatoly Sobchak as a true Democrat and so on, his consent to the appointment of Cherksov really looked paradoxical. But now that we know what kind of Democrat Anatoly Alexandrovich really was and what connected him with the office, this agreement should not be surprising. In March 2003, the Profil magazine, number 10, 328, dated March 10, 2003, published an article by Natalia Zhukova, hostage of the Nordwest, dedicated to forecasts about the imminent resignation of Viktor Cherksov from the post of plenipotentiary representative of the President of the Russian Federation in the North-Western Federal District. The author of the article, talking about the career of General Cherksov, noticed that in 1992, surrounded by Sobchak, people from the special services gained more and more apparatus weight. Without their help, the mayor professor simply could not manage the city. And therefore, Just like that, out of principle, Sobchak, of course, did not want to stir up a scandal around the figure of Cherksov and spoil relations with his colleague, Putin. Besides, the author of Profile noted, although the mayor did not like the new head of the MGB department, at the same time he knew that there were no surprises to be expected from him. According to rumors, Sobchak has repeatedly spoken out in the sense that Cherksov always serves those who own power. Power in the city belonged to him, Sobchak, and in the country, to Yeltsin, who was quite sympathetic to the St. Petersburg mayor Democrat. The beginning of the 1990s was indeed the time when the office actively penetrated not only various social and political movements, but also, which was very important, in criminal and business circles. Building a managed democracy, on the one hand, required cutting off the correct opposition from the wrong ones, and on the other hand, of course, it also required money. Much money. And in this regard, the food scam of 1991 to 1992 was an excellent way to replenish the office cash desk. And now the question is, what did Dmitry Medvedev do during this extremely interesting period in the history of Russia and, in particular, the city on the Neva?